Long after the final echoes of sandals faded from the cobbled roads of the Roman Empire, the world continued to turn, carrying forward the scattered pieces of a civilization that once stretched from the windswept moors of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of Arabia. But behind the towering columns and monumental arches, beneath the surface of what we often think we know, lies a quieter and stranger Rome, one full of unexpected details, forgotten customs, and curious innovations that whisper to us across the centuries. This is not the Rome of Caesar's conquests or Hollywood spectacles. It is a gentler, more intricate mosaic of human endeavor. A place where facts blend with fascination, ideal for minds seeking wonder, even as they drift towards sleep. It is often said that all roads lead to Rome, and yet few imagine that those roads, spanning over 250,000 miles in total, were so expertly built that many still survive beneath modern highways. Roman engineers developed a layered method of road construction, so precise and enduring that some of their original roads still serve traffic today. These paths, paved with stone, gravel, and volcanic cement, were marvels of planning and durability. And Roman road markers, called milestones, were so systematically placed that they essentially formed the world's first long-distance road signage network, mapping out the empire in a way no civilization had done before. Beneath those roads and villas, the Romans built something even more remarkable: a network of underground sewers and aqueducts that moved water with such efficiency that it wasn't replicated on a large scale until modern times. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, was first constructed more than 2,500 years ago and is still partially operational. This ancient infrastructure carried wastewater away from the Forum and into the Tiber River, helping the city breathe and grow. Yet the water system was not only practical, it was, in its own way, a quiet triumph of Roman luxury. Wealthy homes could be fitted with running water, indoor plumbing, and even heated floors, thanks to the Roman invention of the hypocaust, a radiant heating system that channeled hot air beneath the floors and through the walls. Such engineering was centuries ahead of its time and rarely matched until well into the industrial age. And while we often associate Rome with stern marble statues and battlefield discipline, it was also a place of humor, graffiti, and playfulness. In the city of Pompeii, frozen in time by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, archaeologists uncovered thousands of examples of ancient graffiti scrawled onto walls, columns, and even the inside of homes. These scribbles range from political slogans and love notes to jokes and drawings, revealing a human side to Roman life that feels startlingly modern. One inscription reads, "We two dear men, friends forever, were here. If you want to know our names, they are Gaius and Aulus." Another, more mischievous, declares, "I screwed the barmaid." It's a reminder that behind the imperial grandeur stood ordinary people, lovers, jesters, gossips, whose voices still echo in the cracks of stone. The empire's fondness for cleverness extended beyond words. Roman concrete, known as opus caementicium, was so ingeniously formulated that modern scientists have only recently begun to understand its durability. The secret ingredient, volcanic ash, which allowed the concrete to strengthen over time when exposed to seawater. In fact, some Roman harbor structures have stood submerged for nearly 2 millennia without crumbling, outperforming many modern marine constructions. This self-healing concrete, as researchers now call it, is being studied for its potential use in future sustainable architecture. Yet Rome was not only skilled in building things, it also excelled at organizing people. One of its most surprising administrative feats was the cursus publicus, a state-run courier and transport system that functioned as an early version of the postal service. Riders could travel with official dispatches across vast stretches of the empire, stopping at well-placed relay stations stocked with fresh horses, food, and accommodation. Some historians estimate that official messages could travel over 50 miles in a single day, a remarkable speed for the ancient world. The pace of Roman life was not all work and duty, however. Public baths were a cornerstone of social life, serving as communal gathering places where citizens could cleanse, relax, and exchange news. These bath complexes, or thermae, often included saunas, gyms, gardens, libraries, and even snack bars. Bathing rituals were highly structured, moving from hot to cold rooms in a specific order, and demonstrated Rome's commitment to wellness as well as luxury. And while the elite could afford more ornate private baths, the large public ones were often free or inexpensive, making them a rare example of accessible opulence in antiquity. Even the humble spoon carries a trace of Roman ingenuity. The cochlea, a small Roman spoon with a pointed end, was designed specifically for extracting snails from their shells, a favored delicacy. The pointed tip could also be used to scoop out sea urchins or slice soft fruit. Everyday tools were not merely practical, they reflected the refined tastes and tactile elegance that wove through Roman material culture, from silver tableware to mosaic-decorated floor tiles. As we float gently through these surprising details, the Roman Empire begins to feel less like a distant relic and more like a strangely familiar presence, one that breathed, bathed, joked, and invented with a quiet brilliance that still ripples through the modern world. In the stillness of night, this ancient realm opens slowly before us, not with the blare of trumpets, but with the soft whisper of facts too delightful to forget. As our journey continues, the grandeur of the Roman Empire gradually gives way to the subtler rhythms of daily life, where the extraordinary often lived quietly beneath the surface of the ordinary. While history remembers the thunder of legions and the oratory of emperors, the everyday fabric of Rome was threaded with details that surprise, enchant, and occasionally amuse. Even the most mundane objects and routines were laced with meaning, efficiency, and a certain sense of artistry, revealing a civilization that prized both function and form in equal measure. One of the most surprising aspects of Roman life was its deeply embedded sense of cleanliness and personal care. While we may associate advanced hygiene with modernity, the Romans had an entire industry devoted to grooming. Barbershops or tonstrine were common throughout the empire, offering haircuts, beard trimming, and even minor surgical procedures. These shops were social spaces too, places where gossip flowed as freely as oil and wine. For those who could afford it, body scrubs and massages using olive oil were part of a standard cleansing ritual. Instead of soap, Romans would rub oil onto their skin and scrape it off with a curved metal tool known as a strigil, removing dirt and dead skin in the process. This practice, widespread among both athletes and nobles, speaks to a civilization remarkably attentive to the body's well-being. In kitchens and market stalls, another kind of ingenuity was at play. The Romans developed complex systems for food preservation, including pickling, smoking, and salting. Garum, a fermented fish sauce with a pungent aroma, became one of the most widely consumed condiments in the empire. Produced in large vats along the coasts, garum was a staple seasoning, as common as salt or olive oil. Different grades of garum were made for different classes, from the finest blends served at patrician feasts to more modest versions sold in street stalls. The idea of a universal flavor enhancer, made through fermentation and distributed across continents, foreshadows the global spice trade centuries later. Even dining customs reveal a different side of Rome than we often picture. Instead of sitting upright at tables, elite Romans reclined on cushioned couches arranged around a central table, a layout known as the triclinium. Meals could stretch on for hours, accompanied by music, recitations of poetry, and philosophical conversation. For the wealthy, dinner was as much a performance as it was nourishment. Yet alongside these luxurious banquets, most Romans ate modestly. Bread, lentils, cheese, olives, and fruit formed the core of the daily diet. Portable street food, much like today's fast food, was sold in small shops called thermopolia, where customers could order hot meals from large clay jars set into stone counters. These shops served workers and travelers, offering a glimpse of urban life that feels both ancient and strangely familiar. In education, Roman children learned to read and write on wax tablets using a stylus, a reusable surface that could be smoothed over for the next lesson. These early writing tools reveal a practical sensibility that prioritized economy and repetition. Boys typically received more formal education than girls, but daughters of wealthy families could still be highly literate, especially in poetry, philosophy, and household management. One of the most touching artifacts from Roman Britain is a small child's homework tablet, scratched with a sentence they were practicing: "I shall greet my father, I shall greet my mother." A simple phrase echoing softly across time, reminding us that behind every grand structure were people with tender intentions and everyday routines. Roman timekeeping was another quiet marvel. Though the empire spanned many time zones, Romans used water clocks and sundials to track the passage of hours with surprising precision. Public sundials stood in city squares, while smaller, portable versions were carried by travelers. Some even adjusted for latitude, showing how attuned the Romans were to the movement of the sun across different geographies. And their calendar, originally a lunar system, was eventually reformed by Julius Caesar into the solar-based Julian calendar, which remained in use for over 1,600 years and laid the foundation for the Gregorian calendar still used today. Perhaps most unexpected of all are the Roman apartment buildings, or insulae, which housed the vast majority of urban citizens. These multi-story dwellings were constructed from brick and concrete, some reaching up to 6 stories tall. The lower floors were reserved for shops and wealthier tenants, while the upper levels were less stable and more cramped. While far from luxurious, these buildings reveal an early form of vertical urban planning, complete with narrow staircases, shared latrines, and communal water access. The challenges of living in an insula were many: fire hazards, poor ventilation and noise, yet they also represent one of the earliest examples of city housing on a mass scale. Roman pets, too, offer a surprising window into the empire's emotional life. Dogs were common companions, often used for hunting or guarding homes, but they were also kept for comfort. Inscriptions on tombstones for beloved pets have been found across the empire, including one that reads, "To Helena, my dearest little soul." Birds, especially songbirds, were prized for their beauty and melody, and some Romans even kept monkeys, ferrets, and exotic animals imported through trade routes that stretched to India and Africa. The Roman world, it turns out, was not only vast in land and law but also in affection. In these glimpses of daily grooming rituals, childlike handwriting, seasoning vats by the sea, and birds chirping in shaded courtyards, we find a quieter Rome, less clad in armor and marble, and more clothed in fabric, warmth, and small astonishments. These ordinary wonders, gently unfolding through the hush of night, invite us to see the Roman Empire not just as an empire of conquest, but as a living, breathing world, one not so unlike our own. As the moon would have cast its silver glow over the curved rooftops of Rome, so too do we continue to trace the subtler contours of this ancient world, those overlooked details nestled in corners where the flicker of a lamplight may have once danced. Beyond the monuments and military might, The empire thrived on quiet intricacies, the rituals, routines, and cultural curiosities that shaped how Romans understood themselves and their surroundings. In this stillness, we begin to notice the unexpected, little marvels that speak not of emperors and wars, but of imagination, organization, and deeply rooted patterns of life. Perhaps one of the most quietly astonishing aspects of the Roman world was its postal system, a precursor to the idea of national infrastructure long before the modern state. Known as the cursus publicus, it was established by Augustus and operated through a web of relay stations called mutationes and rest stops known as mansunas. These outposts were spaced at regular intervals, stocked with fresh horses, provisions, and messengers. Only official government correspondents could use this system, but the speed and reliability it provided helped to unify the vast stretches of empire, ensuring that decisions made in Rome could reach the farthest provinces in a matter of days. One could imagine a letter departing from the capital and passing quietly through forests, deserts, and mountain passes, a lifeline stitched through silence. Alongside this administrative achievement was Rome's enduring fascination with time and the heavens. The Romans inherited much of their astronomical knowledge from the Greeks and Egyptians, but they refined it into detailed calendars and star charts that guided civic life. Temples and public buildings were often aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and planetary movements, revealing a culture attentive to the rhythms of the sky. In the city of Rome itself, the Emperor Augustus erected a massive sundial called the Solarium Augusti, which used a towering obelisk as its gnomon. On certain days of the year, its shadow would fall precisely on a line marking Caesar's birthday or other significant dates, blending cosmic movement with political symbolism. Even the coins that jingled softly in the folds of a Roman's tunic carried secrets. Roman coinage was not merely monetary, it was also a tool of storytelling and subtle persuasion. Emperors had their faces stamped on denarii and aurae not only to reinforce their presence, but to communicate values and victories. One coin might depict a goddess of peace, while another featured a conquered region bound in chains. These images were carefully chosen, circulating narratives as well as silver. Some coins even honored eclipses or natural events, offering tiny metal records of celestial occurrences. Today, historians study these coins not just for their economic role, but for the delicate messages they carried across palms and pockets, silently shaping the identity of an empire. As we linger in this mental twilight, the unexpected keeps unfolding. Take, for instance, the Roman fascination with automata, self-moving machines that blended art with early engineering. Though not widespread, accounts from the period describe mechanical devices used in temples, gardens, and theaters. These included automated doors powered by steam or water pressure, theatrical props that moved with hidden gears, and even fountains shaped like animals that would come to life with flowing water. In the writings of Hero of Alexandria, a Greek engineer working during Roman rule, we find descriptions of coin-operated machines, wind-powered organs, and puppets controlled by rotating cylinders. While these devices were limited in scale and use, they reflect a spirit of creative curiosity that shimmered quietly beneath the empire's surface. Roman medicine also holds its share of subtle wonders. Though limited by the scientific knowledge of the time, Roman doctors developed surprisingly advanced surgical tools and techniques. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed medical kits containing scalpels, forceps, speculums, and even bone drills, many of which resemble modern instruments in form and function. The famous physician Galen, whose work dominated medical thought for centuries, performed complex procedures and emphasized the importance of anatomy and observation. Hospitals known as valetudinaria were built especially for soldiers, providing organized care and treatment. These early medical centers, though rudimentary by today's standards, reveal a structured approach to healing that echoes through centuries. Perhaps one of the most quietly profound aspects of Roman life was its relationship with death and memory. Roman tombstones scattered across the former empire offer deeply personal glimpses into lives otherwise lost to history. Many include inscriptions written in the first person, a tradition known as the speaking epitaph. These voices from the past address the living directly, offering advice, humor, or simply a reminder of their brief existence. One such inscription reads, "Traveler, I am what you will be. I was what you are. So live wisely and enjoy your days." Another, carved with care into weathered stone, gently states, "I who walked now sleep. Wake not the silence." These words, softened by time, turn the coldness of stone into something warm, familiar, and human. We find in these remnants, in coins, stars, gears, and graves, a Roman Empire that pulsed not only with power, but with presence. It was a civilization of quiet brilliance, able to leave its mark on the world not just through conquest, but through an enduring intimacy with time, space, and human experience. These soft facts, tucked gently into the folds of history, remind us that greatness is often hidden in detail, and that even empires leave behind whispers as well as walls. As the hush of history deepens, we move beyond the outward symbols of Rome, the laurels, the togas, the marble busts, and settle into the subtler realms of identity, belief, and symbolism. The outer world of empire was wrapped in grandeur, but beneath that surface lay a thoughtful culture that engaged deeply with ritual, clothing, status, and the shifting rhythms of life. Even the most recognizable Roman elements, so familiar today in name and image, contain layers of meaning that continue to surprise and enchant. The Roman toga, perhaps the most iconic garment in the empire's wardrobe, was not a casual outfit, but a carefully draped and highly symbolic piece of clothing. Made from a large semicircular piece of woolen fabric, often up to 20 feet wide, the toga required time and practice to wear properly. It was reserved almost exclusively for male Roman citizens and was worn primarily during formal or public occasions. Different colors and styles conveyed specific messages. The toga praetexta, with a purple border, was worn by magistrates and children of nobility. The pure white toga candida marked a man campaigning for political office, and the somber toga pulla, made of dark wool, was worn during mourning. Draping the toga correctly was such an important skill that some Romans employed professional dressers to assist them, a quiet detail that reminds us how status could be encoded even in fabric. Even hair was a matter of careful presentation. While Roman men typically kept their hair short and well-groomed, a sign of discipline and citizenship, hairstyles among women shifted with the tides of fashion and politics. During the Flavian dynasty, aristocratic women sported elaborate coiffures piled high with curls and braids, sometimes supported by wire frames or adorned with jewels. These hairstyles were not only personal expressions but also political signals, subtly aligning the wearer with imperial ideals or family lineage. In public, hair could communicate as much as words, and Roman sculptures often preserved these styles in intricate, lifelike detail, allowing us to glimpse the texture of taste centuries after the strands have vanished. Roman naming conventions, too, reveal a structured yet surprisingly rich system of identity. A typical male citizen bore three names: the praenomen, given name; nomen, family name; and cognomen, additional name, often reflecting lineage, achievement, or personality. For example, Gaius Julius Caesar, one of history's most famous figures, bore a personal name, a clan name, and a family branch title. As time went on, names could become even more elaborate, sometimes including honorifics or adoptive elements. Women's names were often simpler, usually reflecting the family name in a feminine form, such as Julia or Claudia. While seemingly rigid, this naming system allowed subtle variations, marking a person's social place, achievements, and relationships in ways both deeply personal and quietly official. Rituals were another silent architecture within Roman life. From birth to death, a Roman's world was framed by ceremonies, many of them domestic and modest in scale. Upon the birth of a child, it was customary to place protective charms around the home, and on the 9th day for boys or the 8th for girls, the family held a naming ceremony called the Dies Lustricus, a day of purification and official recognition. These intimate rites, steeped in superstition and hope, were mirrored later in life by more public milestones, such as the toga virilis ceremony, when a young boy transitioned into manhood by receiving his first adult toga. Each step was marked not just by age but by transformation, physical, social, and symbolic. Religion in Rome was less about doctrine and more about duty, woven through the fabric of civic and private life alike. Temples dotted every city, each dedicated to specific gods whose favor was sought in all endeavors. But perhaps more compelling than the grand rituals were the quiet acts of household worship. Every Roman home, no matter how humble, maintained a shrine known as the Lararium, where the household gods, the Lars and Penes, were honored daily. Offerings of wine, bread, or incense were made at these small altars, often tucked into a corner of the kitchen or dining room. These rituals didn't require a priest or public space, just the flicker of a flame, the whisper of a prayer, and a deep connection to family and tradition. It was a kind of spiritual grounding, quiet and constant, guiding the household through both the mundane and the momentous. Even entertainment held hidden depths. While gladiatorial games are often remembered for their violence, the spectacles at the Colosseum were also complex productions involving choreography, stagecraft, and symbolism. Exotic animals were imported from across the empire: lions from Africa, elephants from India, bears from the Alps, and released into the arena in grand displays of power and reach. These animals were not just curiosities, they were messages, living symbols of Rome's dominion over the natural world. The games were tightly scheduled, beginning with animal hunts in the morning, followed by executions or mythological reenactments at midday, and culminating with gladiator combat in the afternoon. Everything unfolded with precision, and the audience, familiar with the symbolism and stories, participated in a shared cultural rhythm. And in quieter corners, the world of games and play brought levity to Roman life. Children played with dolls made of wood or ivory, carved with jointed limbs and painted faces. Dice games and board games such as Ludus Latruncularum, a Roman precursor to chess or checkers, offered amusement and strategic challenge alike. Marbles, knucklebones, and spinning tops have all been found in archaeological digs, preserving the echoes of laughter from long ago. Even in the army, games were a welcome reprieve from long marches and harsh discipline. A board etched into the paving stones of Hadrian's Wall suggests that Roman soldiers passed the time with strategy games while watching over the chilly northern frontier. In every fold of Roman life, whether in the drape of a toga, the flicker of a household altar, or the soft rattle of dice on a stone floor, there is an attention to form and meaning that quietly astounds. These details, seemingly small, created a coherent sense of identity and belonging that held the vast empire together, not just with roads and legions, but with shared symbols, gestures, and beliefs. As the night deepens and we drift further into this ancient world, it is these softer, richer truths that gently carry us forward. As we drift deeper into the world of ancient Rome, a new layer begins to unfold, not one of politics or power, but of quiet perception. What did it feel like, smell like, and sound like to walk through a Roman home, garden, or forum? What colors lined the walls? What textures brushed against the fingertips? In a civilization so often remembered for its monumental architecture, it is easy to overlook how deeply the Romans engaged the senses, crafting environments not only to impress, but to comfort, soothe, and inspire. The Roman home, or domus, was not merely a shelter, but a carefully curated space of atmosphere and meaning. At its heart lay the atrium, an open-roofed courtyard designed to welcome both air and light. Rainwater was collected in a sunken basin called the impluvium, which reflected the sky above and provided gentle sound as droplets struck its surface. This architectural feature, elegant and functional, created a living rhythm within the house, a natural pulse of moisture, echo, and daylight that connected the indoors with the heavens. The walls of Roman homes were often alive with color. Far from the sterile white marble of popular imagination, Romans favored vibrant hues, deep reds, rich yellows, earthy ochres, and serene blues. In the city of Pompeii, entire rooms have been preserved with intricate frescoes that depict mythological scenes, garden landscapes, and architectural illusions. These paintings were not just decoration, they transformed small spaces into imaginative worlds, dissolving the boundary between interior and exterior, between what was real and what was beautifully possible. One popular technique was called trompe-l'œil, French for deceive the eye, though it was known in Roman times simply as a clever use of illusion. Artists painted columns that weren't there, windows looking out onto imaginary gardens, and animals that seemed to perch just beyond reach. This delight in visual trickery reveals a culture attuned not only to realism, but to whimsy, a gentle kind of magic rendered in pigment and plaster. The layout of a Roman house reflected social values as well as aesthetic ones. Guests entered into the atrium, but would only be invited deeper into the tablinum, or office, if they were of particular importance. Beyond that, more intimate spaces such as bedrooms and garden courtyards created layers of privacy. A room called the triclinium, used for dining, was often adorned with the most ornate designs, as it was where hospitality and display met. These architectural choices formed a soft choreography of movement and experience, where every step through the home carried subtle meaning. Gardens, both private and public, were deeply cherished in Roman culture. Wealthy villas often featured haughty, inner courtyards filled with fragrant herbs, manicured hedges, and sculpted fountains. The murmur of water, the rustle of laurel leaves, the scent of rosemary or lavender, all combined to create spaces of serenity and retreat. Romans believed that nature, properly arranged, brought harmony to the soul. Even small homes might keep potted plants or wall frescoes of imagined gardens to invite tranquility indoors. Water, ever present in Roman life, was not only a necessity but a sensory experience. The gentle splash of a fountain in a bathhouse, the trickle of an aqueduct overhead, the shimmering pools in a courtyard, all offered moments of pause and reflection. The nymphaea, ornate public fountains, named for water spirits, often featured elaborate statuary and carved basins. These were places not just for refreshment, but for admiration and repose, woven into the daily pattern of life, with quiet elegance. Sound in Rome was both lively and intentional. In the bustling forums, the clatter of carts, the rhythm of sandals, the murmur of markets and the lilt of oratory created a lively chorus. Yet within private homes and sacred spaces, sound was softened, filtered through open atriums, absorbed by draped textiles, or shaped by architectural acoustics. In many temples and bathhouses, curved walls and domed ceilings were designed to enhance or dampen echoes, making the human voice a more subtle instrument. Roman architects were, in their own way, composers of silence and resonance. Even fragrance held importance. Incense was burned in temples and homes alike, sometimes as offering, sometimes as ambiance. Spices and resins from Arabia, India and North Africa, cinnamon, myrrh, frankincense, arrived through vast trade routes and were prized not just for their rarity, but for the atmosphere they created. Wealthy Romans perfumed their clothing, bathed in scented oils, and used floral garlands at feasts to create a feast not only for the tongue, but for the nose and eyes alike. Roman furniture, though often simple in form, was thoughtfully crafted. Folding stools, reclining couches, low wooden tables, all designed with the body's posture and comfort in mind. Materials ranged from modest pine to rare imported cedar, often inlaid with ivory or bronze. Even lamps, used to light homes after dusk, took the form of miniature artworks, molded into the shapes of animals, mythic creatures, or delicate shells. When lit, their flickering flames danced across walls already painted with imagined worlds, creating layers of moving shadow and color that must have seemed quietly alive. In these immersive environments, painted rooms, rustling gardens, fragrant baths and echoing halls, we find a Roman world that was far from static stone. It was vivid, textured, and deeply sensual. The empire, for all its might, was also a place that delighted in beauty, subtlety, and sensation, a civilization of details that sought to stir not just the mind, but the senses. And in this soft enveloping tapestry of light and sound, of warmth and scent, it becomes easier to imagine a Rome that still lives, not in ruins but in atmosphere. Moving now from the color of Roman walls to the words that filled their spaces, we enter the quieter domain of language, where thought took form through ink and speech, parchment and papyrus. The Roman Empire was in many ways a world of the written word. Laws were carved in stone, proclamations inscribed on bronze tablets, and stories whispered in shaded courtyards, or read aloud in the flickering lamplight of upper chambers. It was a civilization that cherished not only the building of roads and monuments, but the crafting of sentences, the shaping of ideas, and the subtle art of communication. Roman literacy was more widespread than often assumed, especially in urban areas where education was seen as a mark of civility and status. Many children, particularly boys of citizen families, were taught to read and write from an early age. Their first tools were wax tablets, small wooden frames filled with a layer of dark, pliable wax. Using a stylus made of metal or bone, they would carefully trace letters into the surface. Mistakes could be smoothed over with the flat end of the stylus and tried again, making the wax tablet both textbook and chalkboard in one. As students advanced, they graduated to ink and papyrus, delicate sheets imported from Egypt and treasured for their lightness and texture. Ink was made from soot or crushed berries mixed with gum and water, creating a fluid that could be stored in ceramic pots and applied with a sharpened reed pen called a calamus. The writing style was elegant yet efficient, with a distinctive hand that curled and looped across the page in a flowing rhythm. Often, manuscripts were rolled into scrolls and stored in wooden shelves or carried in cylindrical cases made of leather or woven reeds. Libraries were a source of pride and quiet power in Rome. Wealthy individuals maintained private collections, while public libraries, such as the famed Bibliotheca Ulpia in the Forum of Trajan, offered reading rooms for scholars and statesmen. These spaces were typically divided into Greek and Latin sections, with niches along the walls holding scrolls in neat bundles. Silence was respected, and knowledge was regarded not merely as a personal accomplishment, but as a civic good. A learned man could quote Virgil or Cicero, discuss Stoic philosophy, or recite historical dates, and in doing so, participate in a tradition that connected Rome to its past and future alike. Storytelling, however, was not confined to libraries or the literate elite. It was also spoken, shared aloud, and passed from one voice to another in streets, taverns, and kitchens. Epic poems, comedic tales, and local legends all traveled by memory, shaped by the voice and manner of the storyteller. In marketplaces, traveling performers known as mimi and histriones acted out sketches, sometimes satirical, sometimes mythical, to the delight of passing crowds. Theaters, often grand semicircular structures of stone, echoed with laughter and applause, offering drama that ranged from tragic to absurd, from high poetry to bawdy farce. Even in the quietest corners of the empire, storytelling endured. In far-flung forts along the frontiers, soldiers might gather at night to share tales from home or exaggerate their exploits in faraway campaigns. Merchants carried rumors as readily as spices, and innkeepers retold stories overheard from travelers, polishing them with each repetition. This oral culture thrived beneath the grandeur of written texts, weaving its own net of memory, humor, and myth, a softer, more communal kind of history. Among Rome's most enduring contributions to literature was its legal writing. Roman law, deeply detailed and carefully codified, was inscribed not only for enforcement but for posterity. The 12 Tables, dating to the 5th century BCE, were among the first public legal codes and laid the foundation for centuries of jurisprudence. Later, legal scholars such as Gaius and Ulpian refined the principles of property, citizenship, and justice, composing works that would influence medieval and modern law alike. Yet even here, in the crisp language of regulation, there is something quietly poetic, a belief that clarity, structure, and fairness could be written into society itself. Religious and philosophical writing also carried a weight that extended far beyond the walls of Rome. The Stoic philosophers, most notably Seneca and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, left behind reflections that continue to soothe and inspire. Marcus's Meditations, written in his own hand as private guidance for his conduct and mind, remain one of the most quietly profound texts of antiquity. "You have power over your mind," he wrote, "not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words, penned in tents and palaces alike, were never meant for public eyes, and yet they endure as some of the gentlest wisdom ever offered by an emperor. Art also became a form of written expression, though with brushes rather than pens. Mosaics often included inscriptions, dedicatory texts, or fragments of poetry embedded in colored stone. Walls carried messages in both paint and pigment, from humorous slogans to heartfelt dedications. In Pompeii, one graffiti reads simply, "Health to you, traveler, may your journey be kind." Another, found near a bakery, states, "The bread is good, tell your friends." These fragments, preserved in ash and silence, still carry the warmth of casual voices, small declarations that continue to speak across the ages. In the end, the Roman world was not just built in marble and concrete, but also in words, written, spoken, whispered, and sung. The quiet power of a phrase, a line of verse, a well-formed letter carved in stone, These carried as much weight in shaping the empire as legions or laws. And as we imagine a reader unrolling a scroll, or a child scratching their first letters into wax, or a philosopher lighting a lamp before writing in the dim hours of morning, we are reminded that the past still speaks, gently, clearly, and patiently, if only we slow down to listen. As the Roman world expanded, it was not merely power or territory that spread outward, it was motion. People, goods, ideas, and letters all traveled across the empire in a soft but steady rhythm, carried on roads carved from stone and vessels that glided silently across calm waters. Movement was not only possible in the Roman Empire, it was essential, and it was designed with remarkable foresight and quiet genius. While today we marvel at monuments that stood still, it is in the spaces between, the miles crossed and the seas navigated, that we find a living network constantly in motion, shaped by sandals and sails. The Roman road system was perhaps the most ambitious of its kind in the ancient world, stretching across more than 50 modern countries and threading together regions as varied as the green hills of Gaul and the sands of Syria. These roads were marvels of layered construction, with a deep foundation of crushed stone, topped by tightly fitted paving stones that have endured for over 2,000 years. Many bore shallow ruts from cartwheels, worn over centuries like grooves of memory etched into the earth. Travelers moved on foot, by cart, on horseback, or carried in litters borne by slaves. Along the way, they could stop at roadside inns known as corpanae, which offered meals, beds, and sometimes stables for animals. These were rarely luxurious, more functional than fine, but they represented a form of infrastructure designed to serve both military and civilian movement. For the elite, travel could be more comfortable, with access to well-stocked villas or guest houses maintained by allies and friends. For merchants and commoners, the road was a place of mixture, where languages blended, deals were struck, and stories exchanged. Distances were marked by milliaria, stone mile markers placed at regular intervals, each engraved with the distance to Rome, and sometimes the name of the emperor who commissioned the road's maintenance. These mile markers, simple and solid, were part of the soft machinery of empire, a reassurance to the traveler that the state was present, the path was known, and the world was connected. To walk a Roman road was not merely to move from one place to another, but to follow a shared geography where each step aligned with a broader order. Travel by sea was equally vital. Roman merchant ships, known as aeraria, carried grain, olive oil, wine, pottery, and textiles across the Mediterranean, the empire's central lake. These ships were wide-bellied and slow, built for cargo, not speed. They followed seasonal patterns and preferred to hug the coastlines for safety, anchoring in natural harbors or at man-made ports. Navigation was done by sight and by star, using landmarks and memory more than instruments. The sea had its dangers, storms, pirates, unpredictable currents, but the Romans learned to read it with the same precision they brought to roads. Port cities like Ostia, Alexandria, and Carthage bustled with loading docks, warehouses, and taverns filled with sailors and traders. Goods from as far as India and sub-Saharan Africa arrived here, carried along caravan routes before being loaded onto ships bound for Rome and beyond. Pepper, silk, gems, and incense all passed through these trade routes, objects not merely of commerce, but of sensory fascination. To hold a peppercorn from the Malabar coast or a silk thread from China was to touch something that had crossed deserts, rivers, and oceans. Trade was as much a form of wonder as it was of wealth. For long journeys overland, the Romans employed an ingenious vehicle called the carpentum, a two-wheeled covered cart used primarily by women and the elderly. It was cushioned with leather straps and often elaborately decorated, offering a rare softness in the often jostling world of ancient transport. Military wagons, in contrast, were utilitarian and rugged, built to move supplies quickly over rough terrain. And yet, both shared the same network of roads, the same measured routes, the same shadows cast by milestones at dusk. One of the most striking elements of Roman travel was the presence of detailed itineraria, early maps or written lists of travel routes. These were not maps in the modern sense, but elongated scrolls listing cities, stops, distances, and notable landmarks along the way. The Tabula Peutingeriana, a surviving Roman itinerary, stretches out a stylized version of the empire's roads, like a ribbon, distorted in scale but rich in connection. For those who could read them, these itineraries offered structure, expectation, and a kind of symbolic security. The road was never endless. It had a name, a length, and a destination. Messages, too, traveled swiftly through the empire, thanks to the cursus publicus, the state-run courier system that provided fresh horses and riders at regular stations. A well-trained messenger could carry dispatches over 50 miles in a day, allowing emperors to communicate with distant governors in remarkable time. Sealed scrolls, marked with the ring of an official, were carried in leather tubes and guarded with quiet importance. These messages were not only political, they were logistical, legal, and even personal. News of births, deaths, and marriages sometimes rode the same roads as laws and orders, creating a human thread between the peaks of history and the valleys of everyday life. Even in entertainment, the idea of travel took root. The poet Ovid, exiled to the distant city of Tomis on the Black Sea, wrote sorrowful verses that captured the longing for Rome and the ache of displacement. His words, carried by readers across time, reveal how deeply rooted Romans were in the places they knew, and how painful it could be to be severed from them. Travel, for all its marvels, was also a reminder of home. And so the Roman world, vast though it was, never seemed quite distant. Every province, every port, every border fort, they were all woven into one fabric by the quiet rhythm of movement. The clink of a mule's harness on a gravel road, the creak of sails in a morning wind, the soft crunch of sandals at a rest stop, these were the sounds of empire, steady and ongoing. And as we walk now through the soft shadows of those roads, the hush of history continues, carrying us forward step by gentle step. As Roman travelers moved across the empire, they did not journey alone. Alongside them, often unseen but deeply felt, moved gods, spirits, omens, and sacred customs, invisible companions that shaped how the Romans understood the world around them. In this vast civilization, religion was less a separate domain and more an ever-present rhythm woven into law, family, politics, and architecture. It breathed from every altar, flickered in every oil lamp left burning for the dead, and echoed softly in the prayers whispered before dawn. Unlike later monotheistic systems, the traditional Roman religion was polytheistic, filled with gods for every element of life, from grand deities like Jupiter and Venus to the more intimate household spirits. Each god held a role, a sphere of influence, and a distinct personality. Some protected boundaries, others presided over childbirth or harvest. It was a world richly populated with sacred presence, both powerful and approachable, where the divine was felt in the flowering of a laurel tree or the silence of a sanctuary at dusk. Temples were the most visible expressions of Roman piety, rising from city centers and hilltops with stately columns and sculpted pediments. But these were not places of worship in the modern sense. They were homes for the gods. The deity's statue resided inside, and rituals were performed at the altar outside. Offerings might include incense, wine, fruit, or the careful sacrifice of animals, depending on the occasion. Priests and priestesses oversaw these ceremonies, guided not by scripture, but by tradition and precision. The proper gesture, the correct word, the exact moment, all had to align, for the Romans believed that divine favor depended on accurate performance. Yet religion was not confined to public rituals. Within each home, the lararium served as a sacred space for the family's guardian spirits, the lares and penates. These were often represented by small statues placed in a niche or on a household altar, lovingly tended with daily offerings. Before meals, before journeys, before business, small prayers were made, not out of fear but out of familiarity. The gods were not distant, they were part of the home, woven into its walls and windows, its thresholds and hearths. The Romans also practiced augury and haruspice, two deeply rooted systems of interpreting the will of the gods. Augurs would observe the flight patterns of birds, reading meaning in their direction, formation, and calls. Haruspices, often of Etruscan origin, examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, looking for signs of divine approval or warning. These rituals might seem strange today, yet to the Romans, they represented a way of aligning human actions with cosmic rhythms, a search for harmony between what could be seen and what could not. Festivals marked the Roman calendar in joyful abundance, offering days of rest, music, and communal celebration. Saturnalia, one of the most beloved festivals, was held in December and turned the social order upside down. Slaves were served by masters, gifts were exchanged, and laughter echoed through candlelit streets. For a brief time, the strict hierarchies of Roman life softened, replaced by revelry and reversal. Other festivals honored gods of the harvest, the moon, the crossroads, or even the boundary stones that marked a farm's edge. Each event was a way to bring divine rhythm into the human year, to honor, remember, and renew. But even within this deeply rooted system, change was always quietly unfolding. As Rome expanded, it absorbed the gods and beliefs of the peoples it encountered. Egyptian deities such as Isis found followers in Roman cities. Mithras, a Persian god associated with mystery and light, gained popularity among soldiers and the working class. These cults often offered more personal and emotional forms of spirituality, with secret rituals, promises of rebirth, and sacred meals shared in candlelit chambers deep underground. The Mithraea, small subterranean temples dedicated to Mithras, can still be found beneath the streets of Rome and London, their altars and carvings preserved in shadow. And then in the 1st century CE, a new faith began to take root, one that began quietly in the eastern provinces, spreading not through temples or official proclamation, but through conversation, letters, and shared meals. Christianity, emerging from the Jewish traditions of the Eastern Mediterranean, offered a vision of salvation, compassion, and moral renewal. At first it was just one among many sects and cults, meeting in private homes and underground catacombs. It was not recognized and often not understood. Yet over time, its message found resonance among the poor, the enslaved, and eventually even the powerful. By the early 4th century, the tides had shifted. Emperor Constantine, after reportedly seeing a vision before battle, issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, granting Christians the right to worship freely. Within decades, Christianity transformed from a persecuted minority into the empire's dominant faith, and by the end of the century, it became the official religion. Temples to Jupiter and Mars stood empty. Bishops replaced augurs, and basilicas, once public halls, were turned into places of worship. The change was not abrupt, but gradual, like light moving across a stone wall, soft and persistent. Yet even as the gods of old faded from official memory, their presence lingered in art, in language, in the names of planets and months, in the way buildings were aligned to the sun. The spiritual world of Rome did not vanish. It transformed, carrying forward echoes of ritual, pattern, and reverence. Even today, when we speak of Venus or Mercury, when we marvel at a domed temple or light a candle in a quiet moment, we are brushing gently against that ancient thread. In the end, the Roman relationship with the sacred was not static. It was fluid, deeply integrated, and open to evolution. Whether through the formal steps of a state ritual or the whispered hopes of a mother at her lararium, the divine was never far. It walked with the people, moved through their dreams, and shaped the silent corners of their lives. And so, as we rest in this space between memory and meaning, the spiritual heart of Rome continues to flicker, softly, endlessly, like a lamp kept lit through the night. Beneath the gleam of polished marble, behind the arches of aqueducts and the mosaic-lined halls of villas, were hands, tens of thousands of hands. They belonged to potters and blacksmiths, weavers and masons, painters and builders. These were not the names carved into triumphal arches or remembered in the scrolls of historians, but they were the silent architects of the Roman world. With tools of iron and wood, clay and fire, they transformed the raw into the refined, shaping the empire in gestures of patient repetition and practiced grace. In the bustling workshops of cities like Rome, Ostia, and Pompeii, artisans worked in close quarters, often in family-run enterprises passed down through generations. A shoemaker might share a wall with a bronze caster, while a dyer's tubs of crimson and indigo simmered just beyond a weaver's loom. These spaces were rich with movement, the creak of leather being stretched, the hiss of steam rising from dye pots, the soft rhythm of chisels against limestone. The streets themselves were an extension of the workshop, with goods displayed at open windows or carried in baskets through shaded alleys. Roman pottery offers one of the clearest windows into this everyday labor. From the coarse utilitarian jars used to store olive oil and grain, to the delicate terra sigillata, a red gloss ceramic prized for its smooth finish and stamped designs, pottery was everywhere. Factories in Gaul and the Italian countryside produced vast quantities of these wares, exporting them across the empire. The makers often stamped their names or symbols into the clay, a quiet signature that turned a humble bowl into a lasting mark of identity. Today, archaeologists can trace trade routes and regional styles through these small impressions, left by hands that shaped thousands of vessels without ever imagining they would survive 2 millennia. Mosaics were another triumph of patience and artistry. Created from thousands of tiny tesserae, cubes of stone, glass, or ceramic, they adorned floors and walls with images of myth, nature, and daily life. Each mosaic was laid by hand, tessera by tessera, often by teams of craftsmen working under a master designer. The colors were chosen with care, and the placement of each fragment followed a larger vision that might take months or even years to complete. Walking across these mosaics, one could see hunting scenes, portraits, seascapes, and swirling geometric patterns, a world captured in miniature, composed of fragments and intent. Metal workers shaped everything from cooking tools to temple doors. Using forges fueled by charcoal and bellows, they melted and poured bronze and iron into molds carved from wax and clay. The lost wax technique, still used today, allowed them to produce intricate statues and fittings. Armor, weaponry, hinges, locks, and coins all passed through the blackened hands of these skilled laborers. Some even worked in precious metals, crafting rings, fibulae, and pendants that might carry inscriptions, tiny portraits, or sacred symbols. Textile production was another quietly vital craft. Linen and wool were the most common materials, spun and woven by hand in small workshops or private homes. In regions such as Egypt, cotton and silk made rare appearances, imported along trade routes and used sparingly. Dyers worked with natural sources, madder root for red, woad for blue, saffron for yellow. The process was slow and fragrant, involving soaking, boiling, rinsing and drying, a choreography of color drawn from plants and minerals. The most coveted dye, Tyrian purple, was made from thousands of tiny sea snails, each yielding just a drop of pigment. Reserved for emperors and senators, it stained the hems of togas with deep regal hues, a color earned by countless unseen hands along the Mediterranean coast. Stonecutters, or lapidari, were the quiet companions of time. With hammers, chisels and drills powered by bowstrings, they carved inscriptions and ornamentation into marble, basalt and travertine. The work required not only strength but precision. Each letter must be evenly spaced, each surface polished to catch the sun. Their inscriptions honored the dead, marked laws, praised victories, and dedicated temples. They turned memory into material, transforming names and dates into stone that would outlast empire and earthquake alike. But not all labor was celebrated. Much of Rome's workforce, particularly in agriculture, construction and mining, was made up of enslaved people whose contributions were no less profound but often went unacknowledged. In the gold mines of Hispania, enslaved workers dug deep tunnels through rock, guided by oil lamps and working in perilous conditions. In quarries, massive blocks of marble were hewn and hauled by human power, destined for altars, baths, and palaces. On large rural estates, enslaved laborers tended vineyards, harvested wheat, and maintained aqueducts. Their lives were harsh, but their hands fed the cities and laid the foundations of Roman prosperity. Yet even among the enslaved, there were moments of skill and artistry. Some became teachers, scribes, or skilled craftsmen. Others saved their earnings to buy freedom, rising to become citizens and property owners. Their presence reminds us that Roman society, though sharply hierarchical, was also surprisingly fluid, shaped not just from the top down, but from the labor of many who moved quietly through the shadows of history. The tools of these artisans, chisels worn smooth by touch, looms that creaked softly in evening light, brushes dipped in mineral paint, carried a kind of intimacy. They connected the physical world with the imaginative, turning rough material into objects of beauty, purpose, and expression. In every floor tile, every amphora, every carved letter, we can still feel the presence of the person who shaped it, not with loud triumph, but with quiet mastery. And so the Roman Empire, for all its scale, was also a world of the small, the tactile, the handmade. Its greatness was not only written in marble, but etched into the clay of a cooking pot, the dye of a tunic, the texture of a carved beam. In honoring the hands that shaped the empire, we come a little closer to the warmth of the world they helped create. A world built not only for emperors, but for all who lived, worked, and dreamed beneath the Roman sun. In a world without mechanical clocks, time passed more gently. It drifted across the Roman day in soft shadows, in the coolness of morning courtyards and the golden slant of late afternoon sun. It moved through the turning of seasons, the blossoming of fig trees, the hum of cicadas in summer, and the hush of olives ripening on the branch. And yet, for all its natural flow, Roman time was also carefully measured, mapped and marked, a rhythm of life guided by sky, by law, and by custom. The Roman calendar, like much of the empire's framework, was a blend of ancient tradition and careful innovation. The earliest Roman system was a lunar calendar, roughly tracking the moon's cycles, with only 10 months in the year, beginning in March and ending in December. The months of January and February were added later, but the calendar remained imperfect for centuries, requiring frequent adjustments by priests who inserted intercalary months to realign the lunar cycle with the solar year. This system, while spiritually rooted, grew increasingly unwieldy. By the 1st century BCE, reform was needed. Julius Caesar, drawing on the knowledge of Alexandrian astronomers, introduced the Julian calendar in 45 BCE, a solar calendar of 365 days, with a leap day added every 4 years. It was a quiet triumph of mathematics and observation, smoothing the inconsistencies of the past and setting a pattern that would shape timekeeping for over a millennium. Many of our current month names still echo their Roman origins: March for Mars, June for Juno, July renamed in honor of Julius Caesar himself, and August for Augustus, his imperial heir. Days were divided not by hours counted from midnight, but by natural light. The Roman day began at sunrise and was split into 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, though the actual length of an hour changed with the seasons. In summer, daylight hours stretched longer, and each hour extended accordingly. In winter, they shrank. Noon was known as meridies, from which we get meridian, while ora sexta, the 6th hour, gave us the term siesta, marking the restful pause in the hottest part of the day. Time was tracked by simple yet ingenious tools. Sundials or solaria dotted city squares and private gardens, their shadows crawling silently across stone as the sun moved through the sky. Wealthy homes sometimes featured ornate sundials carved from marble, while travelers carried pocket-sized versions made from bronze or wood. Water clocks or clepsydre were used indoors where sunlight could not reach. These vessels dripped water at a steady pace, their levels marked to indicate the passing hours, not entirely precise, but quietly reliable. The Roman week was originally organized around an 8-day cycle known as the nundinum, tied to the rural market schedule. Every 8th day was a market day, a time when farmers, craftsmen, and traders gathered to buy, sell, and socialize. These rhythms shaped the pace of both city and countryside. Later, under Eastern influence, the 7-day week became more widespread, with each day dedicated to a celestial body: the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and the Sun, the pattern that endures in many modern languages today. Festivals and religious observances gave additional shape to the Roman year. Days were classified into categories: dies fasti for legal business, dies nefasti for sacred observance, and dies comitiales for public assemblies. The calendar itself was inscribed in stone and displayed in public forums, listing festivals, market days, and civic events. These inscriptions, called fasti, were guides not only to scheduling, but to identity, reminders that the Roman world was one of cycles, remembrance, and continuity. Seasonal festivals mark turning points in the year, honoring deities and natural forces alike. In the spring came Floralia, a celebration of flowers and fertility, marked by games, performances, and garlands. The Lemuria, held in May, was a quieter observance meant to appease restless spirits of the dead, during which families would walk barefoot through their homes at midnight, casting black beans as offerings. In autumn, Venalia Rustica gave thanks for the grape harvest and the promise of wine to come. Each festival was not only a break from routine, but a sacred pause, a way to step into another rhythm, older and deeper. Birthdays and anniversaries were also carefully observed, both public and private. Emperors' birthdays were marked with games and processions, while family members honored the birth and death dates of loved ones with quiet rites at home. The act of remembering was sacred. Time was not simply linear, but circular, always looping back to what mattered, keeping the past gently present. For the Romans, time was never abstract. It was seen and touched, in the length of a shadow, the chime of a bell in the forum, the turn of a calendar page carved in stone. It was infused with meaning, shaped not just by astronomy or agriculture, but by belief. Time moved through the body, through the rhythm of the workday, the pattern of meals, the pause for ritual, the breath held during an omen. And as night fell, the Romans too would rest, often under woolen blankets, the flicker of oil lamps casting quiet light across painted walls. In those still hours, the flow of time slowed, and the empire slept beneath the same stars that watched it rise. It is easy to imagine, in that hush, the echo of footsteps fading along the stones of a quiet street, a final prayer whispered before sleep, and the gentle certainty that tomorrow, like today, would arrive again in its measured way, wrapped in the soft passage of Roman time. In the wide world of ancient Rome, amid its busy markets, solemn temples, and orderly forums, there was also laughter. There was music and merriment, indulgence and delight. The Romans, for all their discipline and duty, knew the value of enjoyment, not merely as distraction, but as an essential part of a well-lived life. Leisure was not considered idle. It was a space for reflection, connection, and renewal. And through their rituals of rest, from feasting to games, they revealed a culture that understood how to pause, to savor, and to celebrate. One of the most cherished Roman pastimes was the communal meal. While daily dining was often simple, bread, cheese, olives, perhaps a bit of fish or fruit, special occasions called for elaborate banquets. These were held in the triclinium, where guests reclined on cushioned couches arranged in a U-shape around a low table. The courses came in waves. Appetizers such as eggs or stuffed vegetables, main dishes of roasted meats, seafood or stews flavored with herbs and garum, and desserts like honeyed nuts, pastries or sweetened wine-soaked fruits. Meals could stretch for hours, accompanied by live music, poetry recitations, and gentle conversation. Feasting was about more than food. It was a performance, a statement of culture and status. Hosts curated not only the menu, but the order of service, the arrangement of seating, and the entertainment. Some hosts provided small tokens or gifts for guests to take home, and it was not uncommon to compose verses praising the food or the host's hospitality. Even among the humbler classes, shared meals, often enjoyed at public eateries or in open courtyards, held social importance. They were moments of warmth and community, where stories were told, laughter shared, and the bustle of the world briefly set aside. Music was another gentle presence in Roman life. Instruments such as the lyre, cithara, flute, and panpipes provided melodies for religious rites, private gatherings, and public performances. Musicians played in homes, bathhouses, and even in military camps, where songs lifted the spirits of weary soldiers. The tibia, a double-reeded instrument akin to the modern oboe, was often used in ceremonies and festivals, its tones weaving through the air like drifting smoke. For Romans, music could be sacred, celebratory, or soothing, a companion to mood and moment alike. Theater flourished as both art and amusement. Roman comedies, especially those based on earlier Greek models, were lively and full of character, mistaken identities, clever slaves, boastful soldiers, and star-crossed lovers played out their stories before laughing crowds. The playwright Plautus, known for his quick wit and playful language, remains one of the most enduring voices from this era. Tragedies, though less popular, were also performed, often drawing on myth and moral conflict. Theaters themselves were architectural marvels, designed with acoustics that allowed even the softest line to reach the furthest seats. Spectators brought cushions, snacks, and sometimes unruly enthusiasm, turning performances into shared social experiences. Public festivals added bursts of joy to the Roman year. Some were solemn, like Parentalia, a time to honor deceased ancestors with quiet rituals and offerings. Others, like Saturnalia, were exuberant and full of mirth. During Saturnalia, held in December, social norms were suspended, slaves dined with their masters, gifts were exchanged, and the streets rang with laughter and song. Homes were decorated with greenery, and gambling, normally frowned upon, was freely indulged. This festival, with its sense of reversal and release, became one of the most anticipated events of the calendar, blending sacred origins with spontaneous celebration. Romans also found joy in games and pastimes. Board games, such as Ludus Latrunculorum, a strategy game similar to chess, were played on wooden boards or surfaces etched into stone. Dice games were popular too, though dice, often made from bone, ivory, or glass, were associated not only with fun, but with fortune and fate. Children played with dolls, carved animals, and hoops. Adults amused themselves with riddles, word games, and friendly competitions. Even emperors participated. Augustus was known to enjoy a quiet game of dice, while Claudius reportedly wrote a treatise on the game. In the bathhouses, leisure took a particularly refined form. The thermae were not only places to cleanse the body, but to relax the mind. After soaking in the caldarium and refreshing in the frigidarium, bathers could enjoy a massage, take a stroll in the gardens, or settle into a warm corner to read, write, or converse. These complexes were often beautifully decorated, with mosaics, sculptures, and frescoes, a feast for the senses, designed to restore rather than merely entertain. And then there were the amphitheaters, where thousands gathered to watch games, races, and contests. While modern sensibilities may recoil at the brutality of gladiatorial combat, the events themselves were carefully staged and structured, often carrying symbolic or religious meaning. Not all contests were lethal. Many involved skilled displays of athleticism, mock naval battles, or dramatized mythological stories. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus, the largest stadium in Rome, drew massive crowds where fans cheered for their favorite teams with a passion not unlike modern sports. The charioteers, some of whom were slaves or freedmen, could gain immense fame and fortune, their names etched into walls and whispered in marketplaces. Yet even outside of structured events, Romans found pleasure in simple things. A walk through a colonnade on a breezy afternoon, the scent of warm bread drifting from a street vendor's stall, a moment of stillness in a garden, listening to the soft trickle of water. These small acts of enjoyment, scattered across the day, brought texture and joy to life. And in many ways they remain familiar, reminders that pleasure need not be grand to be lasting. So much of Roman leisure was communal, shared meals, shared songs, shared games, and in this sharing, life became more than a sequence of duties. It became a tapestry, rich with color, laughter, music, and flavor. In these quiet pleasures, carefully chosen and generously given, the empire reveals its softer side, not of power, but of presence. A presence we can still feel in the echoes of amphitheaters, in worn game boards etched in stone, and in the simple, enduring joy of a story told at twilight. In the hush of the Roman world, architecture was not always colossal. While aqueducts soared and temples impressed with their scale and symmetry, most Romans spent their lives in spaces far more modest, more personal, homes with shaded courtyards, shops with open counters, apartment blocks with wooden staircases worn smooth by footsteps. These structures may not always command the attention of history, but they held the substance of Roman life. Within them, people were born, cooked meals, raised children, studied scrolls, whispered prayers, and drifted to sleep under tiled roofs warmed by the sun. The Roman domus, the typical house of the wealthier classes, was a carefully organized space designed to balance privacy with social display. Entering from the street, one would pass through a modest doorway and find themselves in the atrium, an open, central court with a rectangular opening in the ceiling, called the compluvium, and a shallow basin below it, the impluvium, to collect rainwater. This simple elegance, allowing natural light and air into the core of the home, offered both beauty and ventilation. Around the atrium, small rooms unfolded, bedrooms known as cubicula, storage rooms, and the tablinum, a space for receiving guests and managing household affairs. Beyond the atrium lay the peristyle, a columned garden courtyard, often adorned with statues, fountains, and potted plants. Birds might flit among the vines, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze could soften the noise of the street beyond. This was the heart of private life, where family members dined, conversed, or simply sat in the shade during warm afternoons. Walls here were often painted in vibrant frescoes, depicting pastoral scenes, gods, and imagined landscapes, a way to expand the visual boundaries of the space, drawing the eye into another world. Houses varied greatly depending on wealth and region. In cities, large insulae, multi-story apartment buildings housed the vast majority of residents. These buildings could be simple or elaborate, with lower floors often occupied by shops and wealthier tenants, while the upper levels became more cramped and less stable. Light came through narrow windows or open doorways, and water might be drawn from shared fountains in the street. Yet even these modest spaces held traces of care. A mosaic here, a shelf with household gods there, a carefully swept floor that caught the sun's early warmth. Roman construction techniques were surprisingly advanced. Concrete, made from volcanic ash, lime and water, allowed for strong, adaptable foundations. Walls were built using the opus caementeum method, a core of concrete faced with brick or stone, while roofs were covered with curved clay tiles that interlocked to channel rain. Heating systems like the hypocaust, which warmed floors and walls using underground furnaces, brought comfort even in the colder regions of the empire. In wealthier homes, the gentle warmth of the floors would have made winter mornings feel calm and luxurious. Shops and workshops often fronted the street, forming a buffer between public and private life. These spaces were usually open to the sidewalk, with counters for displaying wares and storage areas behind. Bakers, barbers, cloth merchants, and metal workers all shared this street-level economy, where transactions were punctuated by greetings, jokes, and the familiar sound of passing carts. Above or behind the shop, the owner might live with their family in a few compact rooms, the smell of baking bread or fresh-cut wood mingling with the daily rhythm of the street. Public buildings, too, played a role in shaping the architecture of daily life. The basilica, originally a large hall used for commerce and legal proceedings, featured high ceilings and rows of columns, a prototype that would later inspire the form of Christian churches. Thermae, the great bath complexes, provided not only cleanliness and comfort, but gathering spaces, libraries, and exercise courts. Forums, lined with porticos and flanked by temples and administrative buildings, served as open-air hubs for conversation, protest, celebration, and exchange. The Roman respect for structure extended even to cities themselves. Urban planning was methodical, with many towns designed on a grid pattern. Streets ran at right angles, creating rectangular blocks, with main thoroughfares oriented to capture prevailing winds or maximize light. At the heart of each town was the forum, a central space for civic life, and surrounding it, the temple, basilica, and market stalls. Aqueducts brought fresh water, sewers carried waste away, and walls protected inhabitants from outside threats. Even in frontier outposts, a sense of order prevailed, a soft echo of Rome's desire to bring shape to the world. But perhaps the most touching aspect of Roman architecture is what remains, not only the grand ruins, but the intimate fragments. A child's footprint preserved in drying tile, a faint inscription scratched into a brick, made by the hand of Marcus with care, a wall painting of a garden in bloom, still bright after centuries beneath ash. These are not the works of emperors, but of people who built not for eternity, but for today, for comfort, for warmth, for life. And as we imagine these spaces, the courtyards bathed in dappled light, the worn staircases, the hush of a small bedroom above a busy street, we draw closer to the lives that once filled them. Architecture was not just shelter, but a mirror of the world the Romans believed in, ordered, functional, adorned with beauty, and deeply human. These walls, these rooms, these colonnades still speak, gently, patiently, as if waiting for us to notice. And in their quiet presence, the story of Rome continues, not with conquest or command, but with the simple elegance of lived space. In the quiet corners of Roman homes and gardens, amid the hum of daily chores and the gentle rustle of olive branches in the breeze, another kind of world quietly unfolded, that of children. Small voices, soft footsteps, curious eyes. Though the ancient world could be harsh and uncertain, Roman childhood held its own rhythms, joys and rituals. It was a time of observation and imitation, of play and instruction, of careful nurturing and gradual entrance into adult life. And while many of the names history remembers belonged to senators, generals and emperors, the world was always beginning anew, with every newborn cry, every first letter scratched into wax, every game played beneath a painted wall. Birth was a moment both sacred and uncertain. Without modern medicine, childbirth could be dangerous, and Roman families often turned to rituals and protective charms to ward off misfortune. Midwives, often experienced women trained through apprenticeship, assisted in labor, offering comfort and guidance. If the child survived the first few days, they were formally welcomed into the family on the 8th day for girls and the 9th day for boys, in a ceremony called the Dies Lustricus, or Day of Purification. The child was named, and a small amulet called a bulla was placed around their neck, a protective charm worn until coming of age. Roman toys, much like their modern counterparts, combined fun with familiarity. Children played with dolls made of wood, wax or ivory, some with jointed limbs and painted faces. They rolled hoops through courtyards, tossed knucklebones, played with carved animals, and chased one another through the colonnades. Miniature carts, clay animals, spinning tops and slings all filled toy boxes in wealthier homes, while simpler handmade versions found their way into more modest ones. The sounds of laughter and running feet, though long silent now, once filled the shaded walkways and garden paths of Roman houses. Education began early, at home. Children learned to speak, observe, and perform basic religious and social rituals from their parents and household slaves, particularly those trained as tutors, called pedagogi. Boys of citizen families, and some girls in wealthier households, progressed to formal education around the age of 7. The ludus, or primary school, was often held in small rented spaces or even outdoors, led by a teacher called the literator. Here children learned to read, write, and do simple arithmetic, often using wax tablets and styluses, practicing their letters again and again until they flowed smoothly and cleanly. Discipline in Roman education was strict. Teachers were known to use rods or lashes to correct mistakes, though this varied by household and teacher. Learning was seen as a moral, as well as intellectual pursuit, a preparation for public life, particularly for boys expected to become citizens and leaders. The use of repetition, memorization, and recitation formed the core of the educational experience, training the mind through pattern and patience. Those who advanced continued on to study under a grammaticus, who taught literature, grammar, and poetry, especially the works of Virgil, Homer, and Horace. Students learned to analyze verse, to imitate its structure, and to appreciate the moral lessons embedded in myth and epic. For the most promising, the final stage of education involved a rhetor, or teacher of rhetoric, who prepared young men for public speaking, an essential skill in Roman politics and law. Here students practiced delivering speeches, constructing arguments, and debating imagined cases, a training ground not only for clarity of thought, but for civic life itself. Girls' education was more limited in formal scope, but daughters of noble families often learned to read, write, and manage household accounts. Some became highly literate, composing poetry or studying philosophy. The letters of elite Roman women, such as Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi brothers, reveal wit, eloquence, and deep moral vision, qualities cultivated quietly, often within the walls of the home. Education for both boys and girls was shaped not only by social expectation, but by access. A reminder that even in the ancient world, learning was both a privilege and a pursuit. Coming of age was marked by distinct rituals. Boys typically underwent the toga virilis ceremony between the ages of 14 and 16, symbolizing their transition into manhood and citizenship. On this day, they laid aside the childhood toga praetexta, trimmed with purple, and donned the plain white toga virilis, the toga of the adult male citizen. Families held small feasts, and offerings were made at temples. The young man's bulla was placed on the household altar, and from that day forward, he could vote, marry, and participate in public life. Girls transitioned more quietly into adulthood, often through marriage in their early to mid-teens, but their roles within the family and community were no less important, managing households, raising children, and preserving ancestral values. Throughout childhood, learning was not confined to schools or tutors. Children absorbed customs through festivals, family stories, visits to temples, and walks through the city. They watched how adults interacted, how they honored the gods, how they spoke and gestured in the forum. These small daily observations were part of their moral education, a soft, ongoing shaping of character and conduct. In the repetition of rituals, in the familiar rhythm of prayers and greetings, they were drawn into a shared cultural identity, one that reached back through generations and forward into the unknown. Even now, the traces of Roman childhood remain. Tiny shoes found buried in the ash of Pompeii, wax tablets scratched with early writing exercises, a small doll carved from bone, arms outstretched in a gesture of play. In these quiet remnants, we glimpse not statues or senators, but something even more timeless, the universality of growing, of learning, of stepping tentatively into the larger world. The Roman child, though long vanished, still walks beside us in imagination, curious, playful, and surrounded by a world rich with lessons waiting to be learned. Health in the Roman world was not merely the absence of illness. It was a state of balance between body and spirit, between food and rest, between the rhythms of nature and the habits of daily life. While their understanding of anatomy was limited by the knowledge of their age, the Romans developed a rich and complex approach to healing, drawing on Greek science, local tradition, and careful observation. They believed that wellness was something to be preserved, cultivated, and restored with care, not through magic, but through attention, touch, and time. At the heart of Roman medical practice stood the legacy of Hippocrates and later Galen, physicians who sought to explain illness through natural causes rather than superstition. Central to their theory was the idea of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health was believed to depend on the balance of these fluids within the body, and illness arose when that balance was disturbed. Though this theory is no longer scientifically valid, it offered a structured way to think about disease and guided treatments for centuries. Roman doctors, or mediti, varied widely in skill and reputation. Some served as personal physicians to emperors or generals, while others worked in towns and villages, tending to patients in modest clinics or homes. They might diagnose through observation, feeling a pulse, studying the color of the skin, listening to a cough, and prescribe a range of treatments, from dietary changes to physical therapies. Surgical intervention was rare but not unknown, and many procedures were surprisingly advanced for their time. Medical tools discovered in places like Pompeii and the army hospital at Vindolanda reveal a startling sophistication. Scalpels, forceps, bone saws, catheters, and even gynecological instruments made from bronze and iron, all shaped for precision, cleaned in boiling water, and stored in compact kits. Some tools resemble their modern counterparts almost exactly, a quiet testimony to the lasting logic of form and function. Roman hospitals, or valetudinaria, were typically found in military settings, designed to care for wounded or ill soldiers. These institutions featured separate wards, sanitation facilities, and access to fresh water, emphasizing rest and hygiene. The care was structured and communal, with attendants monitoring recovery and physicians making rounds. While civilian hospitals, as we know them today, were rare, private care was common in wealthier households, and public physicians sometimes served broader urban populations. Herbal medicine played a key role in Roman healing. Gardens were cultivated with rosemary, mint, thyme, sage, and other useful plants. Chamomile might be brewed for stomach ailments. Poppy sap could ease pain or induce sleep. Garlic was prized for its purifying properties. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder wrote extensively on natural remedies, cataloging hundreds of substances from the plant, mineral, and animal worlds. His natural history is a vast compendium, blending observation with folklore, recording remedies passed down through generations, sometimes effective, sometimes curious, always earnest. Bathing too was part of health. The public thermae were more than social spaces. They served as rituals of cleansing, exercise, and relaxation. A full bathing routine included not only immersion in hot, warm, and cold pools, but also massage, scraping of the skin with a strigil, and time spent in saunas or steam rooms. These rituals were believed to maintain the balance of humors, open the pores, and rid the body of impurities. Even today, the tranquility of a Roman bath complex can be felt in the stillness of its design. Long corridors, soft acoustics, and the slow sound of water moving through stone. Sleep, though less documented, was also seen as a restorative act. Romans believed that dreams could carry messages or reveal imbalances. While dream interpretation often belonged to religion or philosophy, there was an appreciation for the calm of night, a time when the body naturally sought balance. Wealthy homes were built with cubicular tucked away from noise and heat, and even in simpler dwellings, the end of the day was marked by stillness, the snuffing of lamps, the hush of the courtyard, the slow descent into silence. Religious healing coexisted with medical practice. Temples to Asclepius, the Greco-Roman god of medicine, served as pilgrimage sites where the ill sought divine intervention. Pilgrims would sleep in the abaton, a sacred dormitory, hoping to receive a healing dream from the god. Offerings were left in thanks, sometimes including sculpted models of healed body parts, hands, feet, eyes, placed at the altars like soft echoes of suffering made whole. These sanctuaries offered hope where science reached its limits, and their quiet gardens and shaded porticos must have comforted the spirit, even when the body remained in pain. The Romans also understood the importance of public health. Aqueducts brought clean water to cities. Sewers like the Cloaca Maxima carried waste away. Regulations were passed to control overcrowding, and burial laws kept cemeteries outside the city walls. Street fountains ensured that even the poor had access to fresh water, and marketplaces were supervised for cleanliness and fairness. These measures, while unevenly enforced, reflect a broader awareness that health was not only individual, it was communal, part of the shared rhythm of civic life. And in the end, when healing was not possible, the Romans turned to comfort. Family gathered, prayers were said, the dying were not left alone, and the body was washed, dressed, and honored before burial. Death, like birth, was part of the human cycle, met not with denial, but with ritual and remembrance. Tombstones often included tender inscriptions, small windows into lives lived fully, however briefly. In all of this, the tinctures, the tools, the warm water, and whispered blessings, we find a civilization that cared deeply for the body, not only in strength, but in vulnerability. Healing for the Romans was not always about cure. Sometimes it was about presence, of touch, of family, of silence. And in that quiet care, we find something timeless, a belief that to tend the body was also to tend the soul, and that in every act of healing, no matter how small, there was dignity. In the great scroll of Roman history, many names are carved in stone: senators, generals, philosophers, emperors, most are men. And yet, moving softly behind the scenes, through gardens and households, temples and shops, were the women who sustained the Roman world. Their influence often unfolded not on the battlefield or the Senate floor, but in quieter spaces, in decisions made over household accounts, in rituals performed at dawn, in whispered counsel and enduring presence. Roman women, though legally limited in many ways, found agency through custom, relationship, and resilience. And in the delicate threads they wove, the fabric of daily life was held together. From birth, a Roman girl's life was shaped by tradition and expectation. Like boys, she was named on the 8th day of life, but her name typically echoed her father's nomen, or family name. A daughter of the Julius family might be called Julia, a daughter of the Claudius line, Claudia. Diminutives and nicknames distinguished siblings, often passed down through generations in a quiet continuum of family identity. Girls received education largely at home. Daughters of the elite were taught to read, write, sing, and sometimes to speak Greek, the language of culture and diplomacy. More importantly, they were taught how to manage a household, how to oversee servants, balance accounts, and maintain the many rituals that sustained a Roman home. Literacy was not universal, but many women of status were well read, composing letters, poetry, and even philosophical essays. Tomb inscriptions, preserved in stone, reveal women remembered for their intelligence, virtue, and kindness, qualities deeply valued in Roman society. Marriage was a defining transition. Most girls married in their early teens, often to older men chosen by their fathers. While arranged, these unions could grow into deep partnerships. Roman marriage, especially in the upper classes, was a contract, solemnized by ceremony, witnessed by guests, and followed by a procession to the husband's home. The bride wore a flame-colored veil, called the flammeum, and was led across the threshold with symbolic gestures meant to ensure fertility and harmony. Once married, a woman became the domina of the household, the lady overseeing servants, children, and family affairs. Despite lacking formal political power, Roman women held considerable influence in domestic and social spheres. Within the home, they managed property, organized religious festivals, and oversaw the upbringing of children. Many served as priestesses, midwives, or herbalists. The Vestal virgins, chosen in childhood and honored with unique privileges, tended the sacred flame of Vesta and acted as guardians of Rome's spiritual purity. They were among the few women exempt from the usual expectations of marriage, and their vows of chastity were matched by their legal independence. A quiet paradox in a world otherwise defined by male authority. Wealthy women often owned land and slaves, inherited fortunes, and conducted business through male intermediaries, or, in some cases, directly. The legal concept of sine manu marriage, where a woman remained under her father's authority even after marrying, allowed some to retain financial control and inherit property from both husband and father. Inscriptions reveal women who commissioned temples, paid for public fountains, and funded festivals, their generosity marked in stone, their presence felt long after their names faded. Markets and shops were another place where women's presence was felt. Women worked as cloth sellers, innkeepers, perfume vendors, and artisans. In cities and towns, widows and freed women often supported themselves and their families through skilled labor. Some women, especially in freed slave communities, rose to become prominent patrons, commissioning tombs and public works in their own names. The columbaria, underground burial chambers lined with small niches, often bear the names of such women, remembered for their industry and affection. Roman women were also stewards of memory. They maintained ancestral shrines, organized family funerals, and kept alive the traditions passed down through generations. The act of remembrance was central to Roman identity, and women were its quiet custodians. They told stories, tended graves, offered libations to the spirits of the dead, binding the present to the past with every careful gesture. Even in mourning, their role was active. Mourning attire, keening, and ritual observance all affirmed their importance as vessels of continuity. The written record, limited as it is, still holds traces of personality and emotion. The letters of Pliny the Younger describe his wife Calpurnia reading his speeches and singing to herself when he was away. In Pompeii, graffiti bears affectionate notes, carved in casual hands. Greetings from the one who misses you. I love the girl who lives here. These glimpses remind us that love, partnership, and longing were part of Roman womanhood as surely as duty and tradition. Even in politics, women's influence could be felt, if not openly, then through counsel and connection. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, was renowned for her intelligence and subtle guidance. Julia Domna, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus, was a patron of philosophers and scholars, hosting salons of thought in the imperial court. Though not allowed to vote or hold office, such women shaped ideas, advised rulers, and set cultural tones, exercising power not through decree but through presence. And at the other end of the social scale, we find women whose names are lost but whose lives left marks in stone, in household accounts, in worn staircases, and passed down tools. Nurses, cooks, wet nurses, laundresses, street vendors, all part of the living city, part of its sounds and silences. Their hands baked bread, spun wool, tended fevers, and soothed crying children. Their labor, though often unrecognized, made the rest of Roman life possible. To study Roman women is to listen closely, not to the roar of history's trumpet, but to the softer sounds beneath, the creak of a loom, the turning of a scroll, the murmur of a lullaby. It is to remember that behind every public life stood countless private ones, no less full of thought, feeling, and resolve. And in this quieter half of Rome's story, we find strength that is steady rather than sudden, enduring rather than loud, the kind of strength that binds a world together, stitch by patient stitch. Amid the grand arenas and marble forums of ancient Rome, there remained one space more enduring and intimate than all the rest: the home. The Roman household, or domus, was the quiet center of personal identity, where generations met, customs lived, and the rhythms of life played out softly between waking and sleep. Though structures varied in size and ornament, the idea of home remained constant, a place of shelter, tradition, and belonging. Here, under tiled roofs and painted ceilings, the drama of daily life unfolded in small gestures: a shared meal, a morning prayer, a mother's instruction, a grandfather's memory. The Roman family was known as the familia, and it extended beyond what we might consider the nuclear family. It included not only parents and children, but grandparents, cousins, clients, enslaved persons, and household servants, all under the authority of the paterfamilias, the male head of household. This position came with legal control, but also deep responsibility. The paterfamilias oversaw financial decisions, arranged marriages, led religious rites, and was expected to care for the well-being of every member. His authority was near absolute in theory, yet in practice, family life was often shaped by negotiation, affection, and shared history. Marriage was seen as a partnership for life, built on mutual duty and respect. Though roles were clearly divided, couples often collaborated in managing the household. The wife, or materfamilias, directed the domestic sphere, including the upbringing of children, the management of servants, and the hosting of guests. Her influence was quiet but essential, her judgment trusted, her wisdom passed on to sons and daughters alike. Household letters and tomb inscriptions show tender affection between spouses, suggesting that behind formal roles often lay deep companionship. Children, too, were central to Roman domestic life. They brought joy and continuity, hope and obligation. Parents guided them not only in knowledge but in values, teaching virtues like pietas, duty, gravitas, dignity, and fides, loyalty. The family altar served as a daily point of reflection, where offerings to household gods were made, sometimes by the children themselves under the supervision of their elders. These rituals were gentle lessons, reinforcing the family's connection to both ancestors and divine order. Meals were often taken together, reinforcing social bonds and household unity. Breakfast was light: bread, cheese, perhaps a bit of fruit. Lunch might include leftovers from the day before. The main meal, cena, was eaten in the late afternoon or evening. In elite homes, this could be an elaborate affair with multiple courses and entertainment. In more modest settings, it was simpler: a stew of lentils or chickpeas, a loaf of bread, olives, and wine. But in both, the act of gathering mattered more than the food itself. It was a daily return to one another, a ritual of presence. The domestic space was filled with small signs of care: lamps lit at dusk, floors swept clean, garlands hung on feast days. In the atrium, ancestral masks or portraits, the imagines reminded each generation of those who had come before, shaping identity through memory. These images were not only decorative but sacred. During funerals or important ceremonies, they were displayed or even worn by actors who impersonated ancestors, giving voice to the past in the present moment. In this way, the Roman home was not just occupied by the living, but gently inhabited by remembrance. Slavery, though ever present in Roman society, added complexity to domestic life. Enslaved individuals performed household tasks, cared for children, cooked meals, and maintained the physical environment of the home. Some were treated with a degree of familiarity, even affection. Others lived lives of quiet hardship. Those who earned trust or specialized skills might eventually be freed, becoming liberty. Freedmen and freed women, who often remained closely tied to the family they once served. Some were buried in family tombs or honored with inscriptions recognizing their loyalty and years of service. Elderly members of the family held a revered place. Grandparents were respected as sources of wisdom, storytelling, and moral guidance. Their presence added stability to the home, and their experiences, often shared around the hearth or in garden walks, helped weave the younger generation into the long fabric of Roman continuity. Aging was not hidden or feared, but accepted as part of the natural cycle of life. Even tomb inscriptions show a calm embrace of time, often beginning with simple phrases like "Vixit annos octogenita," he lived 80 years. The home also responded to the turning seasons and civic rhythms. During festivals, the lararium would be adorned with flowers or fruit. On market days, the household buzzed with planning and errands. During public holidays, the home became a space of retreat, where families might share special meals or walk to the temple together. Births, marriages, and deaths were marked with both ritual and remembrance, woven into the home's fabric with flowers, incense, music, and prayer. And when absence touched the family through death, distance, or change, the home held memory like a vessel. Empty chairs, unplayed instruments, garments neatly folded, and names spoken with gentle reverence, all helped the living hold on to what had passed. Roman poetry often speaks of longing for the domestic, the familiar garden path, the quiet dining room, the scent of the hearth as a symbol of what is most deeply cherished. In the stillness of Roman domestic life, we find a civilization that prized the everyday. Not every achievement came through conquest. Much was won through kindness, constancy, and the careful tending of those closest to one's heart. And though the walls of Roman homes have long since fallen, their warmth still lingers, in the objects they left behind, in the words carved into stone, and in the universal human longing to belong, to love, and to be remembered. Among the softest threads in the tapestry of Roman life are the scents and tastes that filled its kitchens, markets, and banquet halls. To eat was not merely to nourish the body. It was to participate in tradition, to gather in comfort, to celebrate the seasons and the gods. Food in ancient Rome was layered with memory and meaning. From the humblest stew, shared in a roadside tavern, to the most elaborate course served under painted ceilings, each meal carried with it a sense of place and a quiet joy in the everyday. At its heart, Roman cuisine was shaped by the Mediterranean climate, fertile soil, mild winters, and abundant coastlines. Grains, olives, and grapes formed the foundation of the Roman diet, providing bread, oil, and wine, the three essentials of daily sustenance. These staples were supplemented by fruits, vegetables, legumes, fish, poultry, and occasional cuts of meat. Simplicity was common among the lower classes, while the elite indulged in variety, novelty, and the careful staging of meals. Bread, made from wheat, barley, or spelt, was baked in both private homes and public bakeries. In larger cities like Pompeii, communal ovens served entire neighborhoods. Loaves were marked with stamps identifying the baker, and some were sliced before baking to make them easier to tear apart. Bread could be plain, sweetened with honey, or mixed with herbs and cheese. For many Romans, a small piece of bread dipped in olive oil or wine was the start of nearly every day. Olive oil itself was both food and utility. Used for cooking, seasoning, and even lighting lamps, it was pressed from ripe olives, gathered by hand and sorted with care. The best oils were green gold in color and poured into large clay amphorae for storage or transport. Vineyards, too, were central to Roman agriculture. Wine was consumed daily, sometimes watered down, sometimes mixed with spices or herbs. It could be stored for years or enjoyed young, depending on region and preference. Even poor households had access to basic wines, while the wealthy collected rare vintages and boasted of their cellars. Vegetables such as leeks, cabbages, onions, beans, lentils, and cucumbers filled gardens and tables alike. The Romans made wide use of herbs. Mint, dill, oregano, and coriander lent subtle flavor to both common meals and ceremonial dishes. Fruit was eaten fresh in season or preserved through drying and honeying. Figs, dates, pomegranates, and apples were beloved, and sweet treats often took the form of fruit-filled pastries or cakes made with spelt flour and honey. As sugar was not yet known to the Roman world, Romans had a particular fondness for sauces and seasonings. Chief among these was garum, a fermented fish sauce made from salted fish innards and left to age in the sun. While its aroma could be intense, garum was used much like soy sauce or anchovy paste, added sparingly to enhance flavor. Different regions produced different qualities of garum, and its trade became a minor empire of its own, with jars stamped to show their origin and grade. Feasting for those who could afford it became a refined ritual. The evening cena might include multiple courses: eggs, shellfish and vegetables to begin, meats and stews in the middle, and fruits, nuts or pastries to close. Dishes might be flavored with pepper, vinegar, honey, and exotic spices imported from distant provinces: cinnamon from Arabia, saffron from Spain, and black pepper from India. Meals were presented on low tables around which diners reclined, leaning on their left side and eating with their right hand. Knives and spoons were used, but forks were not yet part of the Roman table. Food was often served in small portions and shared communally, encouraging conversation and a slow, thoughtful pace. Dining was also a setting for display of wealth, education, and taste. Hosts might arrange courses according to theme, serve sculpted foods that imitated other forms, or surprise guests with edible illusions. Cooks in wealthy households, many of them enslaved and trained from youth, could earn fame and rewards for their skill. Banquets might be accompanied by live music, dancing, poetry recitation, or even philosophical debate, transforming the meal into a cultural performance. Outside elite circles, food was more modest but no less meaningful. The Thermopolia, street-side food stalls, offered quick, hot meals to workers and travelers. Their counters, often built with embedded jars to hold stews, soups, or spiced meats, have been preserved in places like Pompeii, revealing menus still visible in faded paint. Popular dishes included lentils with sausage, chickpea porridge, or spiced wine served warm. These spots were not just convenient, they were social, full of the aroma of cooking and the murmur of conversation. Festivals brought special foods tied to seasonal cycles. During Saturnalia, pastries shaped like stars or suns were baked in honor of the returning light. On other feast days, roast pig, honey-glazed cakes, or ritual breads marked the occasion. Offerings were made to the gods, a few drops of wine, a cake, a portion of fruit, reinforcing the bond between nourishment and gratitude. Even in death, food was remembered. Tombs were sometimes inscribed with a person's favorite dish or the meals they had enjoyed most. In one humble epitaph, a man is remembered for loving beans and his wife's cabbage soup. In these small details, love and identity linger, suggesting that food was not only sustenance, but memory, woven into the soul's fabric. To taste Roman cuisine, then, is not only to taste the past, it is to enter the texture of Roman life, the market stall in morning sun, the courtyard shaded by fig trees, the warm hush of an evening meal. Each flavor, each gesture of preparation and serving tells a quiet story. And in that story, there is warmth, care, and a timeless human rhythm. The joy of sharing what we make, and the comfort of coming together at day's end, when hunger is satisfied and conversation drifts softly into night. Though we often picture Rome in marble and triumph, it was also a world of wool and clay, salt and timber, amphorae filled with wine, baskets of fresh figs, counters weighed down with scales and coins. Beneath the sweeping gestures of empire lay the quiet emotion of commerce, the daily exchange of goods, services, and trust that allowed life to move forward, one transaction at a time. Roman trade, far from being grand and abstract, was deeply personal, shaped by hands and footsteps, by familiar faces at stalls and unfamiliar cargoes arriving by sea. At the heart of Roman economic life was the Forum, the open square found in every Roman city. Part civic center, part marketplace, the Forum was where public life met private business. Traders set up stalls under cloth awnings, calling out their wares to passers-by. You might hear the clatter of hooves on stone, the bark of a dog chasing after a cart, or the measured rhythm of a merchant's chant listing the price of grain, oil, or woven cloth. Goods were displayed in open baskets, stacked in amphorae, or hanging from hooks, a feast of color and scent beneath the sun. Vendors sold bread, cheese, olives, dates, onions, and salted fish. Artisans offered shoes, pottery, carved combs, and tools. Scribal services were available for those needing documents written or contracts copied. There were sellers of perfume, jewelry, cloth, and small charms, each tailored to a different need, taste, or moment in life. Coins changed hands in smooth exchanges, stamped with the faces of emperors, gods, or personifications of virtues like Fortuna and Fides, trust and luck, ever-present companions in trade. Currency flowed through the empire in carefully minted denominations. The denarius, a silver coin, formed the backbone of the Roman economy for centuries, while bronze and copper coins handled smaller transactions. Wages for soldiers, payments for labor, and purchases at the market all passed through this quiet system of metal and memory. Prices fluctuated with harvests, wars, and imperial reforms, but the basic mechanisms of trade remained remarkably steady, rooted in shared weights, common laws, and a vast infrastructure of roads and ports. Beyond the Forum, larger-scale trade moved along the empire's veins, its roads and shipping lanes. The Roman road network was not only for soldiers, it was also for merchants and messengers, pilgrims and migrants. Carts loaded with wool, wine, stone, and pottery creaked through mountain passes and across river valleys, stopping at roadside inns to rest and refresh. Couriers carried orders, contracts, and banking instructions between towns, while tax collectors moved through the provinces, recording and retrieving what was owed to Rome. On the water, Roman trade stretched far beyond the empire's borders. The Mediterranean, called Mare Nostrum, our sea, was dotted with ports and harbors that linked cities across continents. Roman ships sailed from Alexandria with Egyptian grain and papyrus, from Carthage with olive oil and ceramics, from Spain with garum and precious metals. From Gaul came wool and timber, from the east glass, silks and spices. India sent pepper, gems and ivory. Arabia offered incense and myrrh. From sub-Saharan Africa came exotic animals and gold dust. These routes, winding across deserts and oceans, were fragile yet enduring threads, connecting faraway lives through shared desire and silent cooperation. Trade was not merely material, it was cultural. With every crate of dyed fabric or bundle of scrolls came ideas, dialects, recipes and customs. Merchants brought stories from distant lands, news of governors and uprisings, gossip of emperors and eclipses. Inns and markets became places where accents blended, and a Gaulish trader might learn bits of Greek while haggling over oil with a sailor from Rhodes. It was not unusual for traders to adopt local dress, languages, or even gods, seeking protection for their journeys and prosperity for their ventures. Rome itself, the beating heart of the empire, consumed more than it produced. Its million-plus inhabitants needed constant supplies of grain, oil, wine, and meat, goods brought in from across the provinces through a massive logistical effort. The annona, or grain supply, was a state-administered system that ensured the city's stability. Granaries stored wheat delivered by ship and wagon. Public distributions, or frumentations, provided free or subsidized grain to eligible citizens. It was a form of ancient social welfare and a political tool used to maintain order and loyalty among the urban poor. Craftsmen and guilds played their part in the local economy. Potters, weavers, blacksmiths, and builders often worked within family workshops or joined collegia, associations of tradespeople who shared resources, training, and rituals. These guilds offered a sense of belonging and protection, celebrating their patron gods with feasts and ceremonies. A shoemaker in Ostia or a silversmith in Gaul might pass on his trade to his children, preserving knowledge as much through muscle memory as instruction. Even enslaved labor had a place within the economic system. Enslaved people worked as accountants, clerks, shopkeepers, and managers, not just in fields or kitchens, but in the smooth running of commercial life. Those who gained trust or skill might be permitted to conduct transactions on behalf of their masters, and in time, some earned or were granted their freedom. Freedmen often remained within the same line of business, becoming property owners and even wealthy patrons in their own right. Their tombs, sometimes grand, reflect both pride and gratitude, lives transformed by labor and chance. Trade festivals and market days punctuated the year, offering farmers and artisans a chance to reach larger audiences. Temporary stalls would appear along the outskirts of towns or around temples, filled with music, chatter, and the earthy smell of fresh produce. Coins changed hands in smooth succession, goods were wrapped in cloth or carried home in woven baskets. These festivals were more than commerce, they were a celebration of connection, a meeting of town and country, of producer and buyer, of speech and silence. In the long hum of Roman trade, we hear not only the clink of coins and the rustle of grain sacks, but something quieter, the breath of movement, of shared purpose, of unseen networks that bound a vast and varied world together. The shop stalls and shipping ledgers may have vanished, but the echo remains in every handmade vessel, every ancient weight, every worn mosaic depicting merchant ships and laden tables. In the movement of things, the Romans found rhythm, sustenance, and surprising unity, a web of exchange spun slowly and steadily through time. Away from the echoing steps of marble cities, beyond the dust of forums and the clamor of trade, stretched the true heartland of the Roman world, its countryside. Here, time unfolded more slowly. The rhythm of life followed the sun, the turning of seasons, and the quiet labor of hands that sowed, harvested, and tended. The Romans, for all their urban accomplishments, never strayed far from the soil. To them, the land was not only resource but refuge, not only sustenance but spirit. In fields of grain, in rows of vines, in the hush of forest glades, they saw reflections of order, peace, and divine generosity. Agriculture was considered the noblest occupation, celebrated in poetry, law, and philosophy. The ideal Roman, particularly in the early Republic, was a landowner, a citizen farmer who balanced public duty with private cultivation. Cincinnatus, one of Rome's revered early heroes, famously returned to his plough after serving as dictator. His humility held up as a model of Roman virtue. To cultivate the land was to participate in the rhythms of creation, to live in harmony with the gods and the natural world. The countryside varied across the empire, from the wheat fields of North Africa to the vineyards of Gaul, from the orchards of Hispania to the pastures of Britannia. Olive groves, fig trees, and almond blossoms dotted the hillsides of Italy, while herds of sheep grazed beneath the watchful eye of shepherds and dogs. The crack of hooves, the creak of wooden carts, the rustle of wind in tall grain, these were the daily sounds of life beyond the city walls. Roman villas served as rural retreats for the wealthy, but many were also working estates. These homes, scattered across the countryside, often included both elegant living quarters and functional farm buildings, wine presses, granaries, olive mills, and slave quarters. Owners visited during the warmer months, escaping the noise of Rome to manage harvests and enjoy cooler air. The poet Horace, in his epistles, speaks fondly of such places, of shaded porches, wild strawberries, and the serenity of a well-tended garden. For laborers and enslaved workers, the countryside was both labor and life. They rose with the sun, pruned vines, tended animals, and guided oxen through fields. Their lives were marked by routine, but also by the simple beauty of open skies, changing weather, and the quiet companionship of nature. Inscriptions and artifacts left behind suggest a mix of hardship and resilience. People rooted in the land, moving with its needs, dreaming sometimes of rest and reward. Seasons played a central role in Roman imagination. Spring brought renewal and planting, summer the sweat of cultivation, autumn the harvest and the wine pressing, winter a time of rest, pruning, and preparation. Festivals like Vinalia and Robigalia honored the gods of crops and weather. Offerings were made to ensure fertility and protect against blight. Farmers watched the stars for signs, studied the wind, and kept calendars marked with ideal planting days. The land was seen as a living entity, to be respected and appeased, a patient, breathing presence beneath their feet. Gardens held special meaning. Whether in countryside villas or city courtyards, they were designed for contemplation as much as cultivation. Wealthy Romans arranged garden spaces with careful geometry, trimmed hedges, fountains, and statuary. But even simpler gardens, with herbs for cooking and medicine, a bench under a fig tree, a few bees humming among the rosemary, provided moments of quiet. In letters and poems, gardens appear again and again as symbols of peace, order, and the pleasures of a life lived close to nature. The Roman calendar itself was tied to agricultural time. Each month, each feast, reflected a seasonal concern, the sowing of seed, the ripening of grain, the turning of the year. Even city dwellers understood these cycles. The calends, nones and ides were not just markers of time but touchstones for farmers and officials alike. And when the city paused to celebrate Saturnalia or feast days, it was not only in honor of the gods, but in recognition of harvests safely gathered, of animals brought in from pasture, of winter's approach, and the need for community and cheer. Poets like Virgil captured the soul of this relationship in works such as the Georgics, which praised the dignity of rural labor and the harmony of life lived in balance with earth and sky. Even as the empire grew more urbanized, the image of the farmer, the shepherd, and the orchard keeper remained powerful, not because they ruled, but because they endured. The countryside represented something lasting, something grounding, something softly eternal. And when Romans passed into old age, many hoped to return to the land, to tend a small plot, to watch the sun rise over furrows they had plowed, to feel the warm wind carry the scent of lavender and laurel. These were the visions of peace that waited at life's end. Tombs in the countryside were often chosen for their views, facing fields or hillsides, allowing the spirit to rest in the company of trees and open air. In every olive grove, in every terraced vineyard, in every quiet path through a cypress grove, the Romans found more than food or wealth. They found rhythm, they found reflection, they found the subtle truth that life, like the land, flourishes best when nurtured, when paced, when honored. And as we walk these imagined fields with them, hearing the chirp of birds and the soft crunch of sandals on soil, we too find that sense of stillness, the deep-rooted calm that lives in the heart of the Roman countryside. Though the Roman countryside was marked by olive trees and orchard rows, the cities were woven with another thread, the desire to gather, to be moved, and to be amazed. Across the empire, from the shadowed stones of provincial amphitheaters to the towering arches of the Colosseum, Romans came together in shared spaces of spectacle. But behind the sound and drama was structure, and behind the structure, meaning, a reflection of order, identity, and control. Entertainment in Rome was never merely leisure. It was architecture in motion, a form of ritual, a mirror held up to the empire itself. The Colosseum, known in antiquity as the Flavian Amphitheater, remains one of the most iconic monuments of Roman engineering. Completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, it could hold more than 50,000 spectators. Designed with remarkable efficiency, it featured numbered seating sections, shaded awnings, and a complex system of corridors and staircases that allowed for quick entry and orderly flow. Beneath the arena floor lay underground chambers, the hypogeum, where animals and performers waited, ready to be raised on hidden platforms into the open air above. But the Colosseum was not built merely to entertain. It was a gift to the people, constructed on the former grounds of Nero's private palace. It was a gesture of restoration and reconciliation, a return of space to the public. The games held there, animal hunts in the morning, executions at midday, gladiatorial combat in the afternoon, followed a strict schedule, unfolding like a carefully choreographed performance. Spectators understood the symbolism, the taming of nature, the punishment of disorder, the triumph of strength. Even in its violence, the arena was framed as a moral landscape. Gladiators, though often associated with blood and brutality, were complex figures. Many were enslaved or condemned criminals, but others were volunteers seeking fame or fortune. They trained in specialized schools called ludi, where they learned not only combat but stagecraft, how to perform, how to provoke, how to fall. Matches were refereed, and rules were followed. Some gladiators became celebrities, their likenesses sold as souvenirs, their victories etched into stone. Though the outcome could be deadly, not every match ended in death. Skill was valued, and the crowd could spare a defeated opponent with a raised thumb or call for execution with a downward gesture, though the exact meaning of these signals remains debated. Animal hunts or venationers brought exotic creatures from across the empire, lions from Africa, tigers from the east, bears from the forests of Germania. These animals were displayed as marvels, their presence reinforcing Rome's reach and dominion over nature. Sometimes they were pitted against each other or hunted by trained warriors. These displays carried awe and spectacle, but also a reminder Rome was the center of a world it had mastered. Elsewhere in the city, the Circus Maximus offered a different kind of thrill, the chariot race. With room for over 150,000 spectators, it was the largest stadium in Rome. Teams identified by colors, red, white, blue, and green, inspired fierce loyalty. Fans wore their colors, shouted chants, and gambled on outcomes. Charioteers raced lightweight carts, pulled by teams of 4 horses, speeding around a central barrier called the Spina, which was often decorated with statues, fountains, and obelisks. Crashes, known as naufragia, were common and dramatic, adding to the excitement. A skilled charioteer, even one born enslaved, could rise to immense fame and wealth, his name cheered from the stands and carved into public walls. Theaters offered yet another form of public gathering, one of words, music, and gesture. Roman plays, drawing on Greek tradition, ranged from bawdy farces to solemn tragedies. Masks and elaborate costumes helped actors play multiple roles, and the audience was rarely quiet, hissing, applauding, or demanding encores. Comedies by Plautus and Terence offered quick dialogue and playful satire, often poking fun at daily life. Tragedies by Seneca leaned into philosophical reflection, with themes of fate, honor, and mortality. These performances, though lighter in tone than gladiator games, also reflected Roman values, cleverness, order, and the tension between freedom and duty. Public baths, while primarily places of cleansing and relaxation, often doubled as cultural hubs. They included reading rooms, gardens, and spaces for performance. Musicians played softly near warm pools, poets recited verses in shaded corners, and statues of gods and emperors lined the marble halls, turning even the act of bathing into a soft, daily ritual of spectacle and shared civility. Religious festivals also brought performance into the streets. During triumphal processions, victorious generals paraded through the city, their faces painted red like the god Jupiter, their soldiers singing, jesting, or scattering coins to the crowd. Captives and spoils of war followed behind, reminding onlookers of Rome's reach and its god's favor. These processions blurred the line between sacred and theatrical, civic and celebratory, transforming city streets into stages of empire. What united these varied spectacles was their ability to gather the people, rich and poor, citizen and foreigner, into a shared experience. Seating was often assigned by status, but within the walls of the arena, or the stone rows of a theater, there was a rare kind of unity. Voices rose in unison, hands clapped together, emotions swelled, the crowd became a single body, witnessing power, beauty, or fear. And in that shared moment, the abstract idea of Rome became something tangible. And yet beneath all the ceremony, there was something quieter, the desire for story, for drama, for release. To watch a charioteer lean into the curve of the track, to hear a line of verse echo beneath an open sky, to feel the collective gasp of a crowd, these were moments of immersion, where time slowed and something eternal stirred. Even today, in the worn arches of amphitheaters and the rounded shadows of ancient theaters, we can almost hear those echoes, not the roar but the rhythm, not the spectacle but the structure beneath it. A reminder that even the grandest displays were built with precision, and that behind the performance was always something more enduring, the architecture of meaning, carefully assembled and quietly preserved. Among the greatest legacies of Rome was not only what it built or conquered, but how it remembered. The Romans carried their past, not just in stories, but in stone and ritual, in the rhythm of festivals and the repetition of names. They lived among their ancestors, not metaphorically but literally, with busts in their atriums, with tombs lining the roads, with the calendar shaped by centuries of tradition. Time to the Romans was not a distant horizon, but a layered presence. Their history was both lived and crafted, a quiet foundation beneath their steps. Memory began at home, within the domus. Elite Roman families preserved imagines, wax masks or sculpted busts of their ancestors, displayed in wooden cabinets or niches in the atrium. During funerals, these images were brought out, and in some cases, worn by actors who recited the deeds of those who came before. These masks were not mere decoration, but powerful emblems of lineage, of duty inherited, and virtues to be upheld. To remember one's forebears was not only an act of reverence, it was a moral guide. Public monuments carried this remembrance into the streets and city squares. Triumphal arches, engraved columns, and bronze statues told stories in visual form, not just of individual glory, but of shared victory, of collective memory. The Arch of Titus, for example, commemorated the conquest of Jerusalem, its inner panels showing Roman soldiers carrying spoils from the Jewish temple. The Column of Trajan, winding like a stone scroll, depicts the emperor's campaign in Dacia in astonishing detail, its figures etched so finely that even folds of fabric and expressions can still be seen in the afternoon light. These monuments were not only to be seen, they were to be walked past, discussed, pointed out to children. They were teachers in marble. Even inscriptions seemingly formal, fixed in Latin's precision, carried deep emotion. A tombstone might tell of a soldier's 25 years of service, a wife's quiet loyalty, a child taken too soon. In a cemetery near Rome, one stone reads simply, "To my dear son, who brought joy in the morning." These words, carved to last, carried memory forward, keeping a name in the light, long after the voice had gone quiet. The Roman calendar itself reflected this sense of layered time. Each month was dotted with anniversaries of battles, dedications of temples, birthdays of emperors. The past was marked not only in stone, but in time's turning, each year circling back to familiar dates, known not just for their place on the calendar, but for what they held in the collective memory. To celebrate a festival was not merely to repeat a ritual, it was to reenact history, to keep the past alive by living it again. Roman historians played a central role in shaping how the past was seen. Writers like Livy, Tacitus, and Suetonius composed long, sweeping accounts of Rome's founding, its growth and its rulers, blending fact with moral reflection, storytelling with political commentary. Livy's great work, Ab Urbe Condita, from the founding of the city, traced Rome's history from mythic origins to the present of his day. He wrote not just to preserve but to inspire, hoping that future generations would learn from the virtues and failures of those who came before. Tacitus, writing with a sharper pen, captured the tension and complexity of imperial politics, offering portraits not only of power, but of paranoia, ambition and decay. His annals and histories are filled with silences and subtext, a subtle commentary on how history is written and by whom. Through these writers, Rome began to view itself with both pride and skepticism as a place of greatness and frailty, of glory and loss. Romans also understood that memory was selective and that to be forgotten was its own kind of death. This understanding led to a practice known as damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. When an emperor or official fell from favor, their names could be erased from inscriptions, their statues defaced or removed. It was a symbolic unmaking, a way of rewriting the record, yet the very scars left behind, the chiseled names, the gaps in frescoes became their own form of memory. Absence too could speak. Temples were also keepers of time. Each one stood not just for a deity, but for a moment, a vow made in war, a recovery from plague, a celebration of peace. Their foundations were dated, their dedications inscribed, their ceremonies aligned with cosmic and civic calendars. To enter a temple was to stand inside a moment made permanent, where prayers once spoken still seemed to linger in the hush of the columns. The household shrine, the lararium, was a miniature version of this impulse to remember. At its small altar, daily offerings were made to household spirits, to ancestors, to the gods who watched over the family. There, even the youngest child could learn the gestures of memory, a libation poured, a name spoken, a moment of silence. These simple acts, repeated morning after morning, kept the past close, familiar, alive. And so the Romans moved through time with layered awareness, living in the present, but always surrounded by echoes. Statues reminded them of leaders, holidays reminded them of victories and vows, tombs reminded them of love. To be Roman was to carry history not behind but beside, as a companion, a shadow, a guide. Even now, as we pass through what remains, a column standing in an open field, an inscription softened by weather, a name half visible in crumbling stone, we feel that same presence. The Romans may be gone, but their memory remains, not only because they built so well, but because they remembered so fully. And in doing so they taught us something quietly profound, that to honor the past is not to hold it still, but to carry it gently forward, through word, through gesture, through the slow unfolding of time. In a civilization that carved its name into stone and charted the passage of stars, the Romans did not turn away from death. They shaped it, named it, ritualized it. Just as they marked birth with amulets and marriage with veils, they marked death with processions, laments, and careful words. For the Romans, the boundary between life and death was not a wall, but a veil, one gently parted through memory, belief, and tradition. To die was not to vanish. It was to pass into a different form of presence, to be remembered and honored, to take one's place among the ancestors. When a Roman died, the home became a space of quiet reverence. If possible, loved ones gathered at the bedside. The closing of the eyes, the final breath, the last words, all were accompanied by soft gestures and the steady rituals of parting. The nearest kin would call out the name of the deceased, sometimes holding a hand or placing a coin beneath the tongue, a fare for Charon, the mythical ferryman who guided souls across the river Styx. Soon after death, the body was washed, anointed, and dressed. Wealthier families might wrap the deceased in fine robes or place tokens and wreaths in the hands. A small altar might be prepared in the atrium with offerings of flowers, oil, or incense. In more modest homes, these acts were performed with equal tenderness, using what the family could afford: a simple cloth, a sprig of laurel, a candle lit at dusk. Funeral processions varied by class, but shared a sense of movement and meaning. In public funerals, the body was carried through the streets, accompanied by family, friends, musicians, and sometimes professional mourners who chanted elegies and beat their breasts in sorrow. Actors might wear the wax imagines of ancestors, walking in silence as reminders of the family line. Along the way, passers-by paused, hats were removed, and words of respect were offered. Even death, in its solemnity, was a civic act, a moment of reflection woven into the life of the city. Burial or cremation followed, depending on period and custom. In earlier centuries, cremation was common, with ashes placed in urns and stored in family tombs or columbaria, chambered burial structures with rows of niches. Later, inhumation became more widespread, with bodies laid in stone sarcophagi, often carved with scenes from myth or life. Tombs lined the roads leading out of cities, for Roman law forbade burial within the urban walls, creating long avenues of remembrance where names, virtues, and lifespans were inscribed for the living to read. These inscriptions often bore a remarkable intimacy. Some were humorous, others stern, but many spoke in soft human tones. "Stranger, stop and read. Here lies one who loved, who laughed, who labored," or "I held my children in my arms, I drank from the cup of life, and now I rest." They were not only records, they were conversations, moments frozen in stone to catch the eye of the passerby and stir a flicker of shared understanding. Roman beliefs about the afterlife were a mosaic of ideas, shaped by older Italic traditions, Greek philosophy, and later Eastern cults. The underworld, ruled by Pluto and shaded by the river Lethe, was a place of shadows and silence. Some believed that souls wandered there as shades, while others envisioned a journey of purification, perhaps even a return to the world in new form. The Stoics viewed death as a natural return to the cosmos, the Epicureans as the end of sensation and fear, and in mystery religions, such as those of Isis or Mithras, believers found hope in rebirth, in light beyond the grave, in sacred initiations that promised transcendence. Households honored the dead through annual rites. During Parentalia, a 9-day festival in February, families visited tombs, brought offerings of wine, garlands and salt, and shared quiet meals in the company of the departed. It was a time of reunion, not sorrow, when the invisible thread between the living and the dead was gently tugged, and memory filled the space where absence had settled. Lamps were lit in tombs, names were softly spoken, even the youngest children learned to honor those who came before. In more personal ways, death was woven into daily life. A small portrait in a hallway, a favored cup kept on a shelf, a bench placed under a tree once planted by a lost grandparent. These were not monuments of grief, but gestures of closeness, ways to keep love present without needing to speak its name. The Romans, though firm in their laws and customs, understood that mourning was a private tide, moving at its own pace. And still, even among the ruins, we find those gentle signs. A mosaic in Ostia that reads, "Be cheerful and live for the day." A child's tombstone with carved toys and a sleepy lamb. A funerary stele showing a couple holding hands, their expressions calm and familiar. These remnants do not speak of fear, but of connection, of a world that paused for a moment to remember, to honor, to softly let go. For the Romans, death was not the final silence. It was a folding of life into memory, a passing into stories told at twilight, into names written on walls, into gestures repeated without needing to be explained. And as we walk through their cemeteries, read their elegies, and sit beneath the same stars that once watched them rest, we too are touched by that quiet continuity. A reminder that to be remembered is to live again, gently and forever, in the minds and hearts of those who come after. In a world filled with change, of seasons, politics, health, and war, the Romans looked often to the unseen. Beneath their temples and laws, baths and theaters, there flowed a quieter current, an enduring conversation with fate, a search for peace through philosophy, and a deep curiosity about how to live well in a world that could not always be controlled. In this space between certainty and wonder, they placed their trust in symbols, rituals, stars, and words, small acts of understanding in the face of the unknown. The concept of fatum, fate, was central to Roman thought. Fate was not a god, but a force, a thread woven through the fabric of life, binding gods and mortals alike. It could not be bargained with or avoided, only accepted. Poets spoke of it in hushed tones, and generals claimed victories not for themselves, but as the fulfillment of fate's designs. Even Jupiter, king of the gods, was subject to its will. And so, while Romans were builders of roads and empires, they were also students of the stars, interpreters of omens, and quiet observers of the signs that might hint at what was to come. One such system of interpretation was augury, the reading of omens from the flight patterns and calls of birds. Augurs, trained priests, observed the sky from sacred hilltops or temple courtyards, interpreting whether the gods favored a given action. Before battles, before the founding of cities, before marriages or public declarations, the heavens were consulted, not to control the future, but to align with it, to ensure that human choices moved with, not against, the unseen order. Alongside fate, there was Fortuna. Fortune, represented as a goddess, Fortuna held a cornucopia in one hand and a rudder in the other. She was abundance and steering, luck and direction. Romans left offerings at her temples, especially before journeys or important decisions. Some wore charms, small wheels, coins, or carved hands to attract her favor. But they also knew she was fickle. Fortune could rise and fall without warning, lifting the low and humbling the proud. In her, the Romans saw the truth of life, that nothing is fixed, and that one must be ready for both harvest and drought, applause and silence. To navigate this uncertainty, many turned to philosophy, not as abstract theory, but as a guide to daily life. Stoicism, introduced from Greece and embraced by Roman thinkers like Seneca and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, taught that peace came from within. One could not control the world, only one's response to it. The key was apatheia, a calm detachment from passion, a quiet mastery of self. The Stoic sage did not deny pain or joy, but accepted them with grace, like passing weather. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote with gentle clarity, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." His reflections, composed in tents during military campaigns, speak in a soft voice that still comforts across time. "Do not waste time arguing what a good man should be," he wrote. "Be one." His wisdom was not shouted, but whispered, reminders that even emperors sought stillness. Epicureanism offered a different path, founded on the belief that pleasure, understood as the absence of pain and disturbance, was the highest good. It emphasized friendship, simple living, and the pursuit of peace. Epicureans did not chase wealth or status, but gathered in gardens to discuss nature, to study quietly, and to savor the small joys of life. Bread, olives, good company, clear skies. They saw no need to fear death, for death, they said, was merely the end of sensation, and what brings no feeling brings no harm. These schools of thought were not confined to philosophers. Their teachings filtered into households, letters, and conversations. A woman in Pompeii might quote Epicurus on a wall. A senator might keep a copy of Epictetus beneath his robe. A merchant might pause to reflect before reacting to loss. Philosophy became part of the fabric of Roman life, a lantern in uncertain corridors, a way to soften life's sharper edges. Dreams were also taken seriously, not as fantasies, but as messages. Books of dream interpretation existed, and temples of healing gods, like Asclepius, welcomed dreamers who sought guidance through sleep. A snake in a dream might mean renewal, a storm, conflict ahead. Whether in sleep, stars or silence, Romans listened closely to the world for meaning, believing that wisdom often arrived not in certainty, but in suggestion. And so, while Rome built in concrete and governed in decree, it also believed in invisible threads. Threads of chance, threads of choice, threads of harmony between soul and sky. In coins tossed into fountains, in prayers whispered before a journey, in the steady breath of a philosopher seated by lamplight, the unseen was always close. A presence not to be feared, but to be acknowledged, even welcomed. Today, when we read the words they left behind, or walk through temples where birds once circled in sacred flight, we too are invited to pause, to consider what moves beyond what can be measured, to sit with questions rather than answers, and perhaps in doing so, we touch that same gentle clarity the Romans sought, a calm in the current, a steady voice within, guiding us onward through the quiet turns of time. No empire ends in a single moment. Rome, which had stretched across continents and centuries, did not collapse like a toppled statue. It softened, shifted, and transformed, slowly, like dusk settling over a familiar city. Its laws, languages, customs, and architecture did not vanish, but changed shape, finding new expressions across new lands and times. To speak of the end of Rome is to speak not of silence, but of transition, the long twilight unfolding of something once vast and luminous, now diffused into many paths. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the Roman world had already begun to evolve. The empire was too large, too complex, and too diverse to remain unchanged. Pressures came from within: economic strain, political instability, a reliance on mercenary armies, and from without, as migrating peoples moved across borders and carved their own histories into the Roman landscape. Emperors came and went in quick succession, and civil wars became more frequent. Yet, daily life continued. Markets still opened, children still learned their letters, and farmers still watched the sky for rain. One of the most defining shifts was the rise of Christianity. What had begun as a small, persecuted sect in the eastern provinces became, through centuries of quiet perseverance, the dominant spiritual force in Rome. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christian worship. Soon after, basilicas were built and church councils were convened. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the empire. Pagan temples were repurposed or left to weather, their stones now echoing with new prayers. This transformation reshaped not only belief, but the rhythms of life. The calendar began to mark saints' days rather than feast days of Jupiter or Mars. The language of law and philosophy was softened by parables and scripture. Charity, humility, and salvation began to take precedence over honor, pride, and civic duty. And yet, echoes of Rome remained. The structure of the church mirrored the structure of the empire: bishops like governors, councils like senates, rituals like processions through city streets. Meanwhile, Rome itself, the eternal city, changed hands. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, entered the city and looted its treasures. It was the first time in 8 centuries that Rome had fallen to a foreign force. The shock rippled across the world, yet even this event, for all its symbolism, was part of a larger continuity. The empire had already begun to split: East and West, Latin and Greek, old and new. Constantinople, once Byzantium, had risen as the eastern capital, strong, wealthy, and well-defended, and it would endure for nearly 1,000 years after the Western emperors had faded into history. In the West, Rome's imperial authority waned. By 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic general Odoacer. But even then, life did not end. It changed. Roman titles were adopted by new rulers. Roman roads continued to carry carts and travelers. Roman villas were lived in, altered, rebuilt. The language evolved, not into silence, but into the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all children of Latin, still bearing the cadence of Roman speech. In this way, Rome became not a place, but a memory embedded in many places. Its laws shaped medieval codes. Its philosophy informed monastic learning. Its architecture inspired cathedrals and town halls. Roman bridges still carried footfalls. Roman aqueducts still whispered with water. Even the idea of Rome, as order, as civilization, as endurance, lingered. Charlemagne would be crowned Emperor of the Romans. The Renaissance would look back to Rome as its guiding star. And throughout the world, cities would rise bearing its name, its influence, its quiet weight. And so the end of Rome was not an ending, but a folding, a long, slow turning of the page. The empire thinned like mist in morning light, leaving behind outlines, impressions and foundations. It remained in gestures, in how we build, govern, write, and dream. And perhaps that is what made Rome eternal, not its walls, but its adaptability. Its ability to be remembered, not in one form, but in many. To live not only in stone, but in thought. Today, when we sit in old amphitheaters, walk down ancient streets, or read words first carved by Roman hands, we are not simply visiting ruins, we are entering a conversation, one that spans centuries, quietly continuing in arches, columns and language. A conversation that says, I was here, I thought, I loved, I built, I changed. And as the twilight of the empire deepened, as the last embers of Roman power flickered and cooled, a softer kind of legacy began to glow, not the brilliance of empire, but the warmth of memory, carried forward in small ways, by countless lives, through time. Even after centuries, the Roman Empire remains, not as it once was, but as something gentler now, no longer the clang of legionnaires or the cry of crowds in amphitheaters, but a fainter resonance, a presence that moves softly through ruins, in language, in customs, and in the way light falls on old stone. Rome did not disappear, it settled into the cracks of memory, into the shape of stories, into the architecture of our understanding. We have walked far, through courtyards and kitchens, across battlefields and gardens, into bathhouses and basilicas, past vineyards, tombs, scrolls and festivals. We have sat beside the fires of Roman homes, listened to philosophers in quiet corners, watched mosaics shimmer with myth, and wandered roads that once stretched across the known world. But perhaps the most enduring part of Rome is not what was built, but what was felt, the hopes, the sorrows, the quiet joys of ordinary people moving through their days beneath the same sun and stars we know now. For every emperor whose name fills the pages of history, there were thousands whose names were never written, farmers and weavers, cooks and scribes, mothers and midwives, teachers and traders, and yet their fingerprints remain, pressed invisibly into the things they touched, the words they passed down, the customs they tended. Their lives were not grand, but they were rich, rich in rhythm, in devotion, in the gentle persistence of living well within the world they knew. In the hum of a busy forum, in the hush of a rural villa, in the worn steps leading down to a spring, we sense that Rome was never just a city. It was a way of seeing, one that balanced structure with soul, order with awe. Its thinkers asked how to live wisely. Its engineers asked how to build well. Its poets asked how to hold sorrow and beauty in the same breath. And its people, quietly, day after day, answered these questions with how they lived. And though time moved forward, as it always must, Rome left threads behind. We trace them in our languages, in the arc of our laws, in the curve of our bridges and domes. We feel them in our calendars, in our alphabets, in the names of planets that still carry the echoes of gods. Even now, the word Roman conjures something at once solid and imagined, a structure, a story, a sense of endurance. But perhaps Rome's most remarkable gift was not its empire or its monuments, but its capacity to remember and to be remembered. In their tombstones and tablets, in their frescoes and letters, the Romans reached forward, toward us. And in turning back to them, listening with quiet care, we answer. We bring them back to presence, if only for a moment, a name read aloud. A life pictured in the mind. A stone, once warm with touch, warmed again by thought. And so, as this long journey draws to its close, let us leave Rome not as tourists of the past, but as quiet companions of it. Let us carry forward not the noise of conquest, but the soft resilience of daily life, the rhythm of sandals on stone, the hush of dawn over a vineyard, the laughter around a modest table. Let us walk gently through the past, as one walks through a grove, not to disturb, but to feel, for in this stillness, Rome remains. And tonight, as sleep begins to settle and the world grows dim, we carry with us a fragment of that ancient light, steady, warm and enduring, like a lamp kept glowing through the night.